Warm welcome to all our speakers, guests, and attendees for ICOMOS India's webinar on Future for the Modern Past, Heritage-Led Development for IIM Ahmedabad. This webinar is organized by ICOMOS India's National Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage in collaboration with ICOMOS India's Emerging Professional Working Group and West Zone. The institutional partner is USM's Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute for Architecture and Environmental Studies, Mumbai. This is the second day of our webinar. Before we begin, a few housekeeping rules. We request everyone to please keep their videos and mics switched off, unless, of course, they are speaking. All questions can be typed out in the Q&A box in the Zoom platform or in the comment section on Facebook. The the question answer session will be at the end of the session, and selected number of questions shall be addressed time permitting. We also request the speakers to please adhere to the time limit for their presentations. The anchor shall notify you if the time limit exceeds. On day 2, we have session 3, which is promoting, protecting, and conserving 20th century heritage. And session 4 is the panel discussion, the way forward. Our anchor for session 3 is Apurva Iyengar. Apurva, over to you.
Session 4. Anchor for this session is Khushi.
Khushi.
Sorry.
Sorry, my apologies. Khushi.
Okay. Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon. I'm Khushi Shah. I'm a conservation engineer and the co-coordinator of ARSA. I'm today's session chair. I'm today's session anchor for the technical session promoting, protecting, and conserving the 20th century heritage. The aim of this session is to understand IIM's decision to abandon efforts at restoration, which is considered as technically impractical and ineffective despite investments of time, efforts, and funds. The session explores carefully chosen narratives of structural retrofit as well as reconstruction of 20th century structures, which are built in reinforced brick and concrete, and will focus on the material, structural, and construction aspects of the buildings, causes of decay, state of conservation, and conservation efforts. Similarly, the speakers will also share the success stories of interpreting, promoting, and valorizing cultural values of the unloved modern to turn the tide against demolitions and poor care. Our session chair for today is Dr. Arun Menon, and we have 5 different speakers lined up: Jigna, Desai, Aishwarya Tipnis, Ciro Caraballo, Wessel de Jonge, and Pavlova-GIllham. Dr. Arun Menon, who is the session chair for today, holds a first degree in architecture and PhD in earthquake engineering. He's a managing partner at CNT Architects and academician, writer, and heritage advocate. Our first speaker, Jigna Desai, is a professor at Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University, and head of a Center for Heritage Conservation, CEPT PRDF. Our second speaker, Ms. Aishwarya Tipnis, is an architect, educator, and heritage conservationist. She is also a published author and currently a visiting faculty at SPA New Delhi. The next speaker is Ciro Caraballo, who has a PhD in architecture. He's an historian, magistrate, heritage and tourism, and a professor for management and social participation of cultural heritage. The next speaker is Wessel de Jonge. He is a practicing architect and a full professor of heritage and design at the Faculty of Architecture of Delft University of Technology in Netherlands. And our last speaker is Pavlova-GIllham. She's an architect, planner, and project manager with over 30 years of professional experience. She has managed and contributed to a wide spectrum of complex multi-million dollar projects, including master plans, carbon mitigation plans, and historic preservation. I now give the floor to Dr. Arun Menon to carry this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Khushi. A very warm welcome to all the speakers and the participants who are logging on to the session. This is a session that's dedicated to the issues of conservation of modern 20th century buildings, to learn from the experiences in similar structures, similar typologies from world over, and see the relevance to the case of IIM Ahmedabad, buildings of IIM Ahmedabad. As I welcome the speakers to this session and all the participants, I would like to point out the key issues that we should be reflecting on in regard to this session. With reference to the buildings on the IIM Ahmedabad campus, once the design and construction of the campus and the buildings on the campus began in 1964, the first set of buildings were the faculty houses, followed by the dorms, and then the buildings of the main academic complex. What is most interesting is how the structural typologies evolved over time from the late 1960s to the 1980s, particularly in terms of the type of masonry that was used and the structural configurations as well. My focus is on the question of reinforcement of brick masonry and the different options that were adopted in these buildings. The reinforcement adopted was primarily because of the knowledge of the earthquake activity, the seismic activity of the region in which these buildings were coming up. The earthquake code in the 1960s already had flagged off this region as a region where earthquakes are to be expected. And therefore, buildings being designed in the period that we're talking of were already conscious of the fact that earthquake resistance was an essential component of the structural design. The reinforcement in these buildings, if you look at the various blocks, particularly with the dormitories, then the academic complex blocks, you have the library, you have the classroom complex, and the faculty blocks. Different ways in which masonry can be reinforced has actually been attempted. If you look at the dormitories, it's more in terms of the robustness of the structural form in an unreinforced masonry construction. Therefore, the dormitory complex, dormitory blocks, do not have reinforcement embedded in the exposed brickwork, but reinforcement is limited to the elements of the arches and the floors. The dormitories have robust structural forms where buttresses and sufficient structural plan density of the walls is an important feature. But when we come to the buildings of the main academic complex, we do see different options adopted in different buildings for reinforcing masonry. For example, in the library building, the option was to place reinforcement directly within the walls, but there are instances in the library building where reinforced concrete mullions have been created, that is, pockets in which concrete of 1:2:4 proportion is used as the grout in which reinforcement is embedded. But there are also walls in which reinforcement is placed in a small pocket within the masonry without having a reinforced concrete mullion. And reinforcement is also placed as bed joint reinforcement in the form of trusses. We then look at the faculty blocks and the classroom complex, where the reinforcement is not sitting within concrete mullions, but is sitting directly within pockets created in the masonry, both in the vertical configuration and in the horizontal configuration. Now, then comes the problem of corrosion of reinforcement, and corrosion of reinforcement particularly complicated due to two factors. One, due to the porosity of the bricks, and the quality of the bricks has been a topic of discussion for a long time, right from the days of the construction of these blocks. So the large porosity, the high porosity of the blocks being one of the fundamental reasons why reinforcement corrosion protection was not available is a fundamental aspect that we need to keep in mind, looking at the kind of corrosion damage that has happened to these constructions. The corrosion in the brickwork. Of course, there is corrosion in the reinforced concrete elements such as the slabs and the arches and other reinforced concrete elements as well. So this is one important aspect that we need to touch upon as to, in exposed brickwork, how is corrosion repair to reinforcement, how feasible is it and how successful is that going to be, has been a question of prime importance as far as the IIMA buildings is concerned. The porosity of brick is a factor that we cannot neglect. Seismic performance of these buildings has been raised from time to time. And as I said, we know that these buildings have been designed at a point in time where the earthquake occurrence in Ahmedabad was already codified. It was already present in the codes, and how the buildings have to be designed to have earthquake resistance was appreciated. Each of these buildings of what it takes to have robust earthquake resisting performance, both in terms of form and in terms of the typology that each of these have been designed with. And finally, the question of when so much of damage and decay to the material is expected, is reconstruction an option with the same details, the same design details? Is that meaningful? Is that feasible? Is that an option that we should even be thinking of? Is a final aspect that from the case studies that you're going to be looking at from the speakers, we will be able to reflect upon. So with that, I would like to leave the floor to the 5 speakers who are going to be bringing us experiences from different parts of the world on challenges of conservation of the 20th century buildings. Thank you, and over to the speakers. We begin with Professor Jigna Desai, who's going to be speaking to us about the conservation of the School of Architecture at Ahmedabad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arun. I'll share my screen. Yeah, can you see the screen, the full screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Arun, and thank you, ICOMOS, for getting me here to speak about the School of Architecture conservation process. Before I start off on what I'm going to say, I'll just start by saying that our process of looking at the building, studying the building, and then eventually conserving the building was a long process. It started as early as 2017, the study of the building. We ended up taking up the conservation process in 2020, which was whenever the lockdown opened. And that too was a slow process. And we will be talking about various stages of that. This entire process was essentially taken up by the team within. The conservation team that is inside the university, the campus office, the conservation lab, the engineers located within the university. So the entire team that you will see that we will be talking about over here, we are all located within the university. And we had continuous feedbacks and discussions from Joshi sir, from the architect, from alumni, from various experts. I believe Susan is here. So from Getty Foundation as well, Susan and Chandler, we had discussions with them off and on, not very formally with Arun as well, but the others were more formal. And the conservation process ended in 2021 when the campus opened, the building opened again for use. The entire presentation is divided in 5 sections. I'm going to speak very briefly about the first section on background, history, value, significance. Arun has insisted that we spend more time on the structural repairs, so I'll be speaking more on the second section. The third, fourth, and fifth are more about how we dealt with services, how we dealt with functionalities, how are we looking at the question of maintenance. I'll quickly brush through it depending on the time that is available to us. So I'm aware that I have 15 minutes to talk. So location and context, I think many of you know that CEPT University is located in the university area of Ahmedabad. It focuses on understanding, designing, planning, constructing, and managing human habitats. The campus of the university has grown around the School of Architecture, designed by the Pritzker laureate B.V. Joshi, and was constructed around between 1962 and 1967. The architecture of this building has been studied and compared to the best of the modernist works in the world. in 2016, as I said, when we started working on it, when we started discussion on it, we established the need for conservation, that it was in the context of the constantly growing campus that had become the university, a university in 2005. And you'll see the graphs and the studies that we did just to look at the number of students that kept on increasing while the size of our campus did not necessarily increase while buildings kept on being added on it. That is a separate discussion. So I'm not going to get into that. But you can just see that when the School of Architecture started over here, the number of students were total on the campus were close to 100. And at the time when we were doing this research in 2017-18, we had more than 2,000 students on campus and more than 300 faculty members. And of course, our books increased, our research that we do has changed, the gender ratio has changed, and that changes the way we look at the values in the campus as well. So these were the contexts that we were dealing with. The process included many people. So as I said, that we had various discussions with people around and the stakeholders, but there were people who are working at the university who invested their time in understanding the history. Gauri Bharat was looking at the different stages of how the campus developed around the School of Architecture, what were the core values around which it was being developed. Professor Uta Joshi, who looked at the relationship between the city and the university that has evolved over the period of years. When it started, the university, the School of Architecture was practically outside the city of Ahmedabad. Now it is within the urban network. Professor Pratyush Shankar, who was our dean at the time, who was a professor teaching here, he was looking at the question of curriculum and how curriculum has evolved over the period of years, how teaching has evolved over the period of years. Shubhra Raje looked at how the campus gets used. Not just in terms of its academic activities, but also the way the students engage with the campus through the culture of, she uses the culture of play as the tool, but generally that tests the adaptability of spaces on the campus, the kind of robustness of spaces and elements. Smith Vyas looked at various tectonic relationships that were important, and all of this was at the core of what we did. We looked into recognized discourses that already exist and that compare the building to various international practices and what makes this an important building. What are the important vistas that are recognized? What are the important elements that are recognized? And the School of Architecture, in more than one way, is a significant structure in the history of architecture. Apart from it being noteworthy in the narrative that builds up a Pritzker laureate's work, it also signifies an important phase of modernism as an interpretation of the principles in the context that is environmentally, socially, economically, culturally, and politically very different from the context of its origin. For India, the institution and its architecture represented a new direction of modernity that respects and values its colonial and traditional past, but is unafraid of reinterpreting and rethinking some fundamentals through the lens of democracy. We also looked at the building from in context of other buildings that were built before and after and around that period. But we also looked at the lived-in associations and the educational value of the building itself. Education without doors is the root value of CEPT campus as conceptualized through the siting and the design of the School of Architecture building. Right from the process of construction, the building was and has been a place for learning for architects and students. CEPT campus and this building has been constant subject of study with various objectives of education, from study of anthropometrics and learning of drawing skills through sketching, documentation in first year, to architectural and design proposals made in postgraduate studios to interpret the nature of modernity and inhabitation of place. apart from the campus being a valuable educational environment, it has significantly contributed to the study of architecture, not only to the students of CEPT, but for many schools in the country. Other than the significance of this building, this educational value was primary platform on which the process of conservation was taken up. I move to the second part, which is structural repair strategies that Arun has insisted that we focus on, and I do this with inputs from Mehul Shah, who's the engineer, Khushi Shah, who's the other Khushi Shah. She's the architect who was in charge of our laboratory at the time, and Nigar Sheikh, who's the conservation engineer, who's currently also working with us on this. We start with the basic introduction to the structural system. The building was designed to be load-bearing structure along the north-south direction with 6.5 brick thick walls supporting reinforced concrete floors consisting of beams and ribs spanning between walls with floor slabs above. The walls were of exposed brick and finished with pointing, whereas all the concrete members are foam finished. What we also looked into were the specification of the materials that were used at the time. You look at over here, one of the photographs, which is one of the older photographs, and you'll see that it is the soffit of this is entirely plastered. This was the repair work that was done after the earthquake, which was not necessarily done after thorough testing. And we found that at many places, the extended spalling was due to the way the repairs through the years, right from 90s to the time we took this up, were done over the period of years. The condition of the structure, when we found it, a lot of this was, as you can see, that the drawing is students' drawing. It was initiated as students' exercises and then extended by the teachers and the professors as the work, as cross-checking and testing processes through rigorous exercises. But we found cracks in reinforced concrete slabs, few beams, fins, and walls that were not. We had noticed that in some cases there was complete delamination and spalling of concrete had taken place. Doors and windows had not been functioning as intended because of the bending in the slabs and the beams. There was moisture seepage from the terrace slab, and services like water supply and drainage were threat to the structure. You can see the condition of this thing here, and upon you can see some of the condition of the slabs and the gargoyles over here, where it was in terrible condition. Concrete was in a much worse condition than the brick walls were, but because the brick walls were essentially very thick and very strong brick walls, where only the surfaces were damaged, except for the north and the south side, which were not thick load-bearing walls, but were cavity walls. Those were situations where the cavity walls had, some of them had bulged, and we had to relook at it. But the load-bearing walls, other than the surface, they were, and in a couple of situations where they had cracked, they were in condition. It was the concrete that we had to worry about. We conducted many tests, and you can see a series of tests that we had conducted in which lasted almost 6 months. We took out 9 cores where from various places. We found that there was porosity in the concrete that in the concrete that was there. We also found that because of the porosity, there was high water absorption. We did steel tests. Now I will be fumbling with the technological terminologies here because I'm not preliminary an engineer, but I think Nigar, who's here, if there are any questions related to that, she'll be able to explain it to us. We had deflections on floor beams, so there was carbonation in concrete, and we did brick tests for crushing strength, which were not to be in such bad conditions. We also then, after that, did tests to arrive at compatible repair materials. So for concrete, we did various mix design. There were trial mixes that we took up. I'm sorry, I have to constantly move this. Yeah, that's better. Yeah. So we took up concrete mix design where trial mixes were tested for their compressive strength after 7 days and 28 days of curing. The color of the cubes were compared with the original. there were steel tests where reinforcement bars were tested, which in order to make sure that the new bars that we took, we eventually chose mild steel rather than taut steel because the difference in behavior was quite problematic, especially considering that we had to bring the old and the new reinforcement together. And then we started sample slabs and sample repairs for further tests. So we picked up the slab, one of the interior slabs that was in a very bad condition, where we could see just to give you a context, the slabs here were 100 mm thick, sorry, 75 mm thick, and there was no concrete, there was no cover for the reinforcement in the slab, which meant that at many places the reinforcement was touching the bottom of the slab, and wherever it had started corroding due to that, there was serious falling to the extent that that slab had become slabs had fallen off while the spaces below were operational. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but that had led to some of these decisions. So we did UPV tests, rebound hammer tests, concrete core tests, and carbonation tests, also on the new sample slabs that we made. Repairs were done through. So we had two conditions. We'd identified two set of conditions. One set of conditions where the slabs were in such terrible condition, and it was mainly slabs and fins that were in such terrible conditions that we had to recast them. But in certain cases, the slabs, there were only patches that were problematic, and the rest of the concrete was fine. So in such cases, we did repairs with polymer modified mortar. And then after having done this, the samples, we then once again took the cores to find what are the kind of bindings, what is the condition of that. The new materials used, we had used ground granulated blast slags, cement. We also tried many makes and many brands, but we found this one to be the closest match, and also was environmentally more suitable because of the way, because of the kind of mix that we were using. The source of the sand and the aggregates, we tried to go as close to where it was brought from in 1962, but some of those places are shut now because of environmental conditions. So we through the suppliers went to the closest color places where the color could match and the properties could match. Yes, as I said, that we for steel we went ahead with the plain mild steel bars because of the behavior. In certain cases, in strategic points, we also used carbon fiber wrapping in order to avoid further stresses that are complex in nature, and especially in context of earthquakes and future earthquakes that we may come across. So here, just to give you a broad idea, when we talk about structural repairs for brick walls, there were a couple of places where we had found deep cracks, and the rest of them were surface situations. So wherever there were surface situations, we had with support, after providing support, removed the outer layer of the brick. And as I said, this is 6.5 thick brick wall, so we could easily remove the outer layer and we could replace the outer layer. But in certain cases, the cracks were very deep, and in those cases we had removed at least 2 layers till the place where we could see the crack going. We stitched the two parts with SS bars inserted in either sides, and we once again then relayered it with new bricks. The north and the south walls, as I said, were cavity walls, and there was reinforcement in the middle, and because of that reinforcement, the walls had bulged. So we had to remove those walls and we had to reconstruct them. And while reconstructing, instead of using RCC, which would again, due to seepage or due to any water ingress, would result into the walls bulging. We used polymer, we restored them through polymer modified mortar, as well as by using the fiber reinforcement rather than RCC reinforcement.
Jigna, sorry, couple of minutes more.
Yeah, so yeah, quickly, the RCC repairs, I think this is what was something that was most interesting, where we had to recast 47.8% of RCC members, and repairs with polymer mortar was to be done on 8.75% of RCC members. I've talked about it in detail, as in the process in detail, but this is kind of a layout of members. These were certain challenges, bonding between the old and new. The thickness of the slab, as I said, that it was on 75 mm, but when we're constructing new slabs, the edges of the beams would crack, and in order to address that, and in order to also have longevity to the top slab, we made the slabs as 100 mm instead of 75 mm. There were the question of pivoted doors at bent slabs, and how do we adjust the 100 mm was an issue. This was a very interesting discussion and a very long discussion that we had when we were using the repairs. I mean, we were repairing with polymer mortar. On the south side, we were able to flush it with the older one, but on the north side, because of the closeness of RCC to the edge, the polymer mortar, modified mortar, when we repair the concrete, it comes out a little bit. And there's a very interesting ideological discussion around the purisms and contingencies of modern architecture that can be had on this. Very quickly, this thermal comfort and services inputs from Rajan Rawal and Mihir Patel, both experts. While we were recasting the slab, we introduced exhaust ventilators. We introduced DGU fixed glass panels. We introduced certain kind, in order to address the question of comfort and the question of new pedagogies, introducing certain air-conditioned spaces. We were able to do all of that so that we did all of this so that certain flows of spaces that were important for this particular section and this building were respected, but at the same time, we were able to achieve comfort. In the last summer, we have noted that there has been the difference of 4 to 5 degrees between the parts of the buildings that are not retrofitted and the parts that are retrofitted. These are cooler by 4 to 5 degrees. Once again, some of the examples of the tools that we used. Functional adaptation, Dilip Patel is our campus architect, and I won't get into this, but in order to respond to the new pedagogic needs of online classes and discussions, we had made certain changes without compromising on the overall spatiality of the space. We also now have a monitoring and maintenance plan. Won't get into the detail, but we have biannual maintenance and yearly maintenance during summer breaks that includes checking of concrete elements and brick walls. And that's it. That's our team, and that's the space with the way it is the way it functions now. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jigna.
I'll stop sharing.
May I now call upon the next speaker, architect Aishwarya Tipnis, who's going to be speaking to us about the Doon School, conservation of the Doon School in Dehradun. I again reiterate to the speakers, please stick to 15 minutes, and 13 minutes I'll show up. At 13 minutes I'll show up and I'll make noise. So please forgive me, but please don't go beyond 15 minutes. Thank you.
And at 15 minutes, Arun, just stop. Just ask it. We just have to stop it. We
Just scream. I'll scream.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. So good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here today. And just to keep up with the time, I'm going to be very quick with the first part of the presentation. So if you don't know, the Doon School is a 20th century building. It is located in the Himalayan foothills at Dehradun. And this was built in 1916 as an Imperial Forest Research Institute. The construction of the building is essentially load-bearing walls of about 2 feet thick with modular fine bricks and lime mortar. This building was designed as a laboratory and an office for the Imperial Forest Institute. But in 1935, it was given to the Doon School, which was set up for building the leaders of New India. And the school actually boasts of an alumni that comprises of various leaders of the country working in different sectors, including journalism, the armed forces, art, literature, and politics. So the whole idea of this particular project really was to come up with a conservation strategy that was at the intersection of the needs of the school as a 21st century institution housed in a 20th century building, the condition of the material fabric, as well as the what I've defined as stories here, essentially the association that the community had with the building. So we had to find a solution that somewhere lay at the intersection of all of these three things. And we started with developing a more pragmatic approach to urban conservation, where we looked at what their development plans were for the future and what we could do to make the building future ready while conserving what mattered to the community. So the first question really that we had to answer was, how do we define this heritage and how do we define the values of this particular heritage? So in 2014, when we started this project, we decided to take a bottom-up approach where we engaged with the community through various workshops, not just with the students, but the staff, but also the alumni, to come up with an understanding of what really mattered and what was this heritage that we had to preserve while taking the building into the 21st century. So the key observation that came out of this series of consultations was that this had to be an institution of excellence. It had to be a center for learning, and the needs of teaching and learning therefore became centric to deciding what we were going to do with this building. And what also came out was that the main building, this building was a key part of the collective identity of every generation of DOSCOs that went through this school. It was often the backdrop for all the group photographs. And so the heritage value actually lay in the collective memory of the community. I'd also like to add here that this building is an unlisted heritage building. And it was the idea to conserve it was largely for the love of the community towards its heritage. So we got involved in the project in 2014 because the community felt that there were some structural issues that came to light. So essentially there was issues with cracks that they were seeing everywhere, and they were really worried that their building is going to be damaged or demolished. And since it was such a core of their identity, they really wanted to go through the whole conservation process. So while we didn't find any original drawings of the building at the Forest Research Institute, we did find some drawings of the building dating to the 1990s. So essentially, when there was the earthquake of 1993 in Uttarkashi, the building had suffered some damage. As a result of which, an entire retrofitting exercise had been taken by the school, where many things had been changed. There were places where they had added RCC lintels. There were places where they added partitions. They added new staircases, and all of this was done with the idea of seismically retrofitting the building for future earthquakes. Now, when we started doing the analysis, we realized that the actual cause of some of the structural issues that we were facing were these interventions that had happened in 1993. We did a first visual analysis of what we thought was the issues. And as you can see on the screen, there were several stepped cracks. There were cracks almost everywhere. And wherever there were these RCC lintels that had been inserted, there were certainly cracks on those sections of the wall. The other issue that was very critical was that the main facade of the building on the ground floor had this ivy, which was again a critical element of their collective identity. The school has always had an ivy, and that was one of the main concerns that came out through the consultation with the community, that they needed the ivy. However, the ivy was trapping a lot of moisture, and all the rooms on the ground floor had severe signs of seepage, and all the bricks were showing signs of efflorescence. So while the ivy was very important to them, it was causing quite a lot of harm to the material fabric of the building. And it was a very challenging thing to sort out, because this is something that was non-negotiable, but we had to find a technical solution so that we could sort material issues while keeping their collective identity intact. So we started first with some very basic investigations as advised by our structural consultant. About when we saw all of those cracks, the first thing that we did was actually investigate all the foundations. And it was quite a relief to find out that the foundations had no issues as such. We looked at the terrace, and we realized that there had been layers of materials put for waterproofing. We did find the original brick bat coba, but then we also found layers of waterproofing that had been put on top of that on the terrace. Further, we realized that the roofing of the building is essentially brick jack arches supported on these I-beams. And in one section, we found there were cracks through each of the jack arches as shown in the drawing here. And this was a concern for us. And when we looked inside, we realized that there was this stepped auditorium, which seemed like pretty old. And everyone from the community told us that it was always there. But this was the section of the building where we found maximum vulnerability on the exterior as well as the interior. And part of the foundations, here we saw cracks going all the way down. The other problem that was very significant was that over the years, all the levels around the building had gone up, and the building had sort of become like a saucer. Now, Dehradun receives very heavy rainfall, and as a result of which, water was always collected at the base. While they had created some drains, some of these drains actually led nowhere and led to more water at the edge of the building, causing severe issues of seepage that we saw. So some of the things that we did was sampling some methods of treatment, which were to get rid of the moss, get rid of, understand what we would do with these drains. So we actually worked out an entire system of water management where we put in print protection as well as an entire system of drainage to take away the surface water from the rain away from the building, in the hope that it would help the building in the water seepage and ingress from the floor. While we did that, I think the entire work was done by the estates department of the school along with local masons and contractors, and it was completely executed locally. So what we learned during this exercise was this was the first intervention that we did. So the photograph on the left is April 2014. As you can see, there is a drain, but all the water is accumulating at the base of the wall. And in 2015, when we were able to add the rainwater pipes and take the water away, this problem has been sorted. It's been over 7 years now, and I have not heard any complaints of water seepage on these walls ever since. The second issue, as I mentioned, was the terrace. Now, the terrace had these layers of waterproofing, and when we started doing the work, we were able to get back to the original level of the slab, and then put in a new layer of waterproofing, like a membrane, and then finish it off with brick tiles, and then make sure that all our water outlets and everything was clear and rainwater could disperse properly. Now, it seems like a very obvious thing to do, but having done this, I think the major problems that they were facing with water seepage from the roof as well as water seepage around the building were completely sorted, and we have not heard any complaints even 7 years after the job has been completed. The other thing was, once we removed the ivy, we realized that most of the pointing had been completely destroyed. And so the local masons, we did a completely pointed out the entire building in lime mortar. And this was new for them, because as a state and as a team of local contractors, they were not very conversant in using traditional materials. However, they had never done something that needed to be reversed, like putting in cement or something like that. So we were lucky really that it wasn't something that had damaged the building beyond reversal. So once the pointing was done, in some sections of the buildings where those RCC lintels had been introduced, we couldn't really remove them, and we decided collectively that we needed to let those beams be, but to add additional reinforcement, the Helifix stainless steel bars were chosen as a system where they were introduced into the cavity in the pointing. And since they were stainless steel and they were compatible with the lime mortar, that was one of the main reasons why we chose to go with them. So they were used on some sections of the facade where we had cracking of the arches, and in some sections of the facade where we literally just bypassed the RCC lintels and fixed it. This was on the advice of the structural engineer on the project. So these are just some pictures I'm showing you of this is what had happened, and the arch had slipped, and this was all taken down and rebuilt, and we've had the Helifix bars inserted at 2 or 3 sections in this particular elevation. I'd like to draw your attention to this particular facade. As you can see that this was, this had been bricked up and these windows had been made small. And this is really what we found out was the actual reason for most of this distress. This stepped auditorium that was added in the 1950s. And when this extra loading from this building was carefully taken down, and the entire space reimagined as a new collaborative working space, we were able to actually address the main reason why this extra stress was coming in with all of these I-beams that were added in the 1950s. As far as the other spaces in the building was concerned, we looking at adding new services that helped 21st century teaching, which required overhauling of the electrical and lighting as well as acoustics in the building. And so we were very careful that while we wanted to add in color and we wanted to add in a new element, but the aesthetic of and the feeling at being at Doon had to be retained. So it was a very critical balance for us to convince the community that bringing on a new thing was actually not a bad idea. And 7 years down the line, I think it has now become part of the collective identity of the current generation of students in the building. This is just a photograph to show that now these buildings are used and loved, and it's very much a part of their identity. So we received a UNESCO award in 2016, and this is how the building looks today. Yeah, I think the whole point of this project was really to say that if there is love for a building and there is the right advice, lot of things can happen. There was no mandate from law. There was nothing that was protecting this building other than the love of the community for its own heritage. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aishwarya Tipnis. Very interesting case study there. Really look forward to the discussion session where there'll be questions on this. May I now call upon the next speaker, Dr. Ciro Caraballo Pericchi, and Dr. Ciro Caraballo is going to be speaking on withstand by the form and not by the accumulation of material, tectonics in the DSA's works. Over to you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for the
Ciro
thank you for the invitation, but the presentation is already record. I want to thank you the invitation to this meeting, and also say, Menon, in Uruguay there are no earthquakes. The staying structure are only possible because there are no earthquakes. Go on with the presentation, please.
Yeah, I'll play it for him.
Okay, better you present the next person and send me the mail with the person technique can deal with this. And I send again my presentation.
Yeah,
No.
let's do that. Let's do that.
Carry on with something else.
Arun, can we go to the next speaker?
Yes.
We will just
We'll go to
Yes.
the next speaker. We'll go to the next speaker. Let me call upon Professor Wessel de Jonge, and Professor Wessel is here to speak to us about the work on the Sanatorium Zonnestraal, a partial reconstruction as a viable strategy to preserve cultural significance. The floor is yours, Professor de Jonge.
Yes, thank you. I will try to share my screen then. Am I enabled to do that?
Yes, I think you should be. Yes, we can see the screen.
Is it full screen now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, well, thanks a lot. I try to keep in time. I did not put a lot of history about the building in the presentation, Professor Joshi asked me to focus on the theme of a partial reconstruction rather than get into the material side and the pathologies of the building. But while talking, I will try to address those issues as well. So my talk is called the Zonnestraal Sanatorium, a partial reconstruction as a viable strategy to preserve cultural significance. And as was mentioned in the previous two lectures, cultural significance is much more than materiality, of course. It's also the love of a community and the interest of the users and so on. So all these intangible values, I think, are also really important for the IIMA case that we are discussing, the Doon School of Management. So let me walk you through the presentation. It's not moving. What is happening? Oh, I have to do it in another way. So the sanatorium was the main part was built in 1928, and it was built for a workers' union of Amsterdam. That means that financial resources were very limited, and the building had to be erected from a minimal budget. And the architects decided for a strategy to make a very specific building for the diamond workers who needed treatment for tuberculosis. And also they understood that, or they were of the opinion that, can everybody switch off their microphones, please? There's some noise in my earphones. Please switch off your microphones. Yes. So they adopted the strategy to build a structure with very simple materials, because they thought that tuberculosis would be exterminated within 30 years. So it was in a way a sort of a temporary structure, which of course was a challenge when it came to its restoration after it was listed as national heritage, as an example of modern movement architecture. So in 1928, the first two buildings were built. The main building in the center with the one, and the left pavilion was built as well in 1928, the first patient pavilion. And the second patient pavilion was only built in 1931. So you see the particular layout of the diagonals in the project, so that all the patients could have a free views, and there would be excess of sunlight, which was thought to be good for curing and so on. Here you see the layout as it was built. The third and the fourth pavilion were never constructed. So as you see, the second pavilion in the back is already there. So this picture was after 1931. And the particularity, of course, is this sort of layout configuration, almost mathematically, that would provide free views from all of the buildings towards nature. And the complex of buildings was organized through an axis that I made red in this image, the main axis that was experienced from the upper floor of the main building to the left, overlooking the landscape with both pavilions to the left and to the right. But at the same time, you may see that there were passageways under the building where cars could reach the building to bring visitors and patients, and on the other side, after making a U-turn, they could re-enter one of those passageways where there was the services for the kitchens and so on. So this was like a sort of highway intersection, you know, the main axis organizing the patient's life that I drew in red on the first floor, and then this functional access for the building and the connection with the outside world, as marked in yellow, made it into a sort of a highway intersection, which was very instrumental. Here you see one of those passageways in the back. This was on the opening day on June 11th, 1928. And in the circle, the yellow circle to the left, you see the main architect, Jan Duiker, at the opening day of the sanatorium in the moors of Hilversum, which is about an hour's drive from Amsterdam. The structural engineer, Jan Gerco Wiebinga, had work experience in the USA, and he after his return in 1926, he published a lot about structural frames and frame construction, balloon frames and so on, as were used in the US. And one of those construction systems that he published in 1928 is this one, where you see actually how steel rods, I marked it with the red ellipse, then metal mesh is attached to that, which is then plastered on two sides. And on the interior, there's a second layer of mesh, and that is plastered on the inside. And this is actually exactly how the sanatorium buildings of 1928 were built after the load-bearing concrete frame was in place. You may see on the left picture, it's not a very good picture, but it's the only one we have. We found it in an archive. You may see the gentleman who is positioned in front of the spandrel. To the left and right of him, you may see those vertical I-beams, IMP 8. And on the right picture during restoration, you may also recognize those I-beams, and the spandrel beneath is then made of this double-sided plastered metal mesh, a very light construction. As I said, the materials were not necessarily very durable. That was also the case with the metal framed windows. Galvanized windows were already available in those years, but they were not used because the architect expected the building to be used only for 30 years. So that was not a good investment in their view. As a matter of fact, the patients who were curing, so most of the people were not sick, it was an aftercare colony. So most of the people were already largely cured from tuberculosis, but they had they needed aftercare, and all kind of activities took place on the premises, and one of them was actually painting the steelwork. So there was actually not really a need to make the steel framed windows very durable, given the fact that the patients would care for their maintenance regularly. A particularity about the facade was that the architects opted for to save more money by making the first window of 1.5 meters like a complete casement, and then the next casements would then lack a jamb, and they were then welded against the first one, with the effect, of course, that they shared a jamb in the middle, as I indicated on the lower picture. That little T profile is actually part of the window to the left as well as part of the window to the right. So you can imagine there was no measure tolerance in the facade at all, which of course produced all kinds of problems later on during construction, because the building is in total 33 meters long, so it had over 20 of such windows. So you can easily imagine if there's 0.5 millimeter of incorrectness in the measures, you end up with a few centimeters short in the end. So they experienced, it was a kind of experimental curtain wall system with all kind of mistakes that were still apparent and became problematic in the restoration later on. So here you see a part of the facade that was kept and restored. Most of the windows were replaced. So one of the problems was the huge extensions. As you compare the plan to the left and to the right, all the dark green were extensions. You may also see that one of the passageways had been closed off, which was a problem. And here you see the complex of buildings after the extensions, with a lot of unclarity in the layout, whereas the building in 1928 was very clear cut and so on. Here you see the images in 1982 to the right, the passageway that was closed off. So the main features that were lost was the clear layout, the passageways, the openness towards nature, the transparency of the building, because the facades were replaced by thick aluminium ones, and the lucid detailing. The material defects, damage and loss was the concrete frame. There was a lack of resistance to shear forces. There was reinforcement, corrosion and cracks. Of the steel framed windows, 90% had lost. So the one that you just saw was the 10% remaining. The roofing was worn out. The building surfaces had almost gone lost, and the interior finishes had gone lost as well. Now, so it was largely a question of restoration in terms of reconstructing many things that had gone lost. And we did that on the basis of extensive research. You see microscopic research of paint layers by historic paint experts. And to the right, you see about 20 binders of historic material that we dug up from the archives in order to make the restoration work and to reconstruct those parts that were missing. You see an example of an interior, left original, a lower left, the research, and the right is the restored interior. So as a matter of fact, only the main reinforced concrete frame was left of the building. All the partitions that were in the building were not original, had been taken out. The 1970s facades had been taken out, and so on and so forth. And only that one remaining part of the building was restored. The problem of the reinforced concrete was that it lacked resistance to shear forces. We found original repairs already in the red circle, and columns that were added already during construction indicated by a red arrow. And we tested various methods to increase the shear force resistance. Here you see a carbon wrap reinforcement. It was already indicated by one of the speakers before, by Bekar. And this made me think also of the brickwork of the IMA building. We were talking about stainless steel, which is, of course, very expensive to reinforce the brickwork. I was also thinking about using ordinary steel welded into an electric circuit so that cathodic protection may work. Of course, carbon reinforcement is also possible. And in the Netherlands, we also use plastics as reinforcement, as well as gluing the bricks together. That may also serve as may be tested for the IMA. Now, the main issue, I see I have to really speed up. The main question has been about the glazing. So in the reconstructed facades, we, instead of 25mm profiles of the original, we decided to choose 32mm, in which we could place double glass of just 11mm thick that we had specifically made for the project, with a drawn glass outer glass panel to mimic the original character of the drawn glass. And this allowed us to make insulation. And the other change that we made, as you see on the bottom image, the shared T profile of two windows, we replaced that for a double L, which allowed 3mm of measure tolerance, which made the reconstruction possible. To the right, you see that detail filled by putty, so you can easily distinguish the reconstructed details from the original details to the left. Here you see the building during sample testing. The corner of glass was tested extensively. As I said, it was drawn glass, but also present-day glass is slightly green, and the upper floor, due to its cross shape, would allow to look through 4 layers of glass. So the greenish tone was really an issue, as well as the rippled surface of the glazing that we had mimicked.
1 minute, please.
Yes, I'm speeding up. It's not easy. So here you see the upper floor, the restored glazing. This is now the conference hall. This is the same room that you just saw, where you see how also all kind of interior materials were remade, like the linoleums on the floor. You can also see in the back the 32 millimeter deep steel profiles of the windows. The linoleum that was originally there was no longer being produced. You see the original samples, 1928 to the left. And we digitized the samples and we tried to analyze the types of pigments that were used, as you see in the middle. And to the right, you see us in the laboratories of DLW Bremen, which is one of the big linoleum manufacturers in Europe, where we were able to remake the linoleums. Here you see the entrance lobby with the restored materiality that was after the restoration. Here you see how the passageway was again made. It was very important, of course, for the concept of the building. Here you see the second pavilion, so actually the third building that collapsed, as you can see to the left in 2005. That was then restored later on. And also the landscape was restored in 2015. With the last few slides, so what you have seen is that the restoration has involved a high degree of reconstruction, but because it was based on extensive research that took several years, we were sure that the truthfulness was also, that it had a high degree of truthfulness. So we could actually, all the reconstructions that we did were based on factual findings of the research. So we didn't take any chances of making mistakes or make interpretations. We kept original materials in constructions wherever possible, but as you've seen with the window details, we accepted a degree of interpretation elsewhere. Also, the complex, it's maybe useful also for the IIMA case, it had some repetition. We had 3 buildings, so we decided also for various strategies for each of the buildings. And that allowed to be a little bit more pragmatic in some instances, because we knew in another building or in another area of the same building, you could see the original details and how it originally was. So important was, in any case, when we were making interpretations, that the original design intentions were respected. So we went for the clear layout, to reintroduce the passageways, to respect the transparency and the lucid detailing of the building, which were key. So this was my presentation. The building is now used as a conference center and for medical daycare treatments. And if you have any questions, you see my email address at the bottom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A very interesting case study. Shall we now move on with...
Arun, I can try and share Ciro's presentation. Just give me a second.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Eladio Dieste studied Cálculo and Mechanical Engineering in Montevideo. After graduation in 1947, he formed a company dedicated to micropeeling and began to provide structural advice to local architects. In 1955, he formed with Eugenia Montañez a construction enterprise with workers and professional machinery and equipment oriented to the construction of industrial buildings. He specialized in construction of multiple curvature bolts in reinforced brick with mobile front works and sectional handling of natural light, which, due to their economy, earned him a recognition and numerous public and private bids through the country. We present the 4 basic structural typologies used in the Dieste works. The upper left image corresponds to a double curvature or gauge bolt. The surface is formed with a grid built with bricks and metal wires, supported on reinforced concrete beams and column structures. They are complemented by steel turnbuckles inside. In this system, free span of 50 meters between supports were achieved. On the right, we'll see a self-supporting bolt, a catenary that is placed linearly with a form of V in the joints, which will house the steel reinforcements and tensor embedded in concrete. With this system, roof with free span of 24 meters and overhang of 13 meters were achieved. These 2 typologies are average of roof thickness of 18 centimeters. In the lower part, we see example of less used typologies also with the reinforced brick, mainly due to the high cost of the formwork and longer construction time, such as ruler surface and folded structure. Knowledge of the materials and their characteristics is essential to understand the particularities of the design and guiding the conservation of the buildings. In this case, the same materials were always used. Handmade bricks for houses, schools, and buildings that not require large span with lime and cement mortars. Industrial brick for bolts with steel wires in the joints. Flat clay style for the final covering of the bolts. Industrial waterproofing materials for the roof. Reinforced concrete beams and columns, generally exposed and designed according to the specific structural loads. And finally, different type plain or braided steel tensor, exposed or embedded. Between 1955 and 1995, the firm Dieste Montañez carried out more than 150 works in Uruguay alone, and another 50 between Argentina and Brazil. It also advised of some works in Spain. Most of the buildings are surprising for their structure, but some of them have really exceptional characteristics. A high percentage of these buildings are still in use. Here we can see a grain silo made with a double curvature bolt acting as a structure, 15 meters high, 30 meters between supports. A small graphic in the upper corner of the image may help to understand the structure. This is the interior of the Church of San Pedro Durazno, a work that replaced a burnt nave with 26 meters wide and 32 meters long, free of support, achieved with recompressed folding, in addition to a masterful handling of light. In this image, we see the roof of a gymnasium with a ghost vault, interrupted in such a way that they generate skylights along the entire surface of the place, achieving a free space between supports of 45 meters. This image corresponds to a fruit storage and processing plant. We see a series of self-supporting balls withstand each one by a central column with an overhang of each side of more than 12 meters. As other buildings, these present problems derive fundamentally from the lack of maintenance of the roof. Almost all the steel works are still in use. It is important to note that in Uruguay there are no earthquakes, so this staying structural feature were possible. Another very important typology in the project is the reinforced brick towers, designed primarily to support water tanks in factories or new urban areas, as well as radio and TV antennas. On the right, we see Maldonado TV antenna, 65 meters high and with a base only of 3.5 meters in diameter. The constructed example we are going to use is the Church of Cristo Obrero. Although it is the best known of Dieste for its special and constructive quality, it is a very small building, with just over 500 meters of construction and 16 meters wide. It is a parish church in a semi-rural working-class area, built between 1958 and 1960. It is important to mention that the design, calculation, and supervision of the work were carried out by Dieste himself, due a spiritual commitment since he had recently been baptized as Catholic. As we see, the interior of the building is clearly developed of integral structural system of reinforced ceramics. The walls here serve as support and generate an integral structure with the double curved bolts of the ceiling. It is completely brick interior with well-placed light entrance, generating an intimate and at the same time sacred space. The temple consists of three parts: a subway baptistry with entrance from the outside to the baptismal fountain, connected with the temple interior. In the rectangular nave, we can observe the development of conoid of the load-bearing walls, and the choir and the choir in the head wall. The chapel of Lourdes, sacristy, and office is in the background. The roof is composed by 5 bolts Gaussian, plus a half-watt bolt that protect the entrance. Finally, there is a free standing bell tower. This image is the excavation of the baptistery. In the background of the image, we can see here is the dry soil and the back a large amount of vegetation. This will change over the years with the urbanization of the area. The trees were cut down, which produced an increase of the water table, generating problems of flooding and constant humidity. At right, we can see the scaffolding that being used to define the curved shape of the lower wall, leaving a space inside which was being filled with reinforced concrete. The curved shape is generated from a straight line on the ground, moving from right to left, thus increasing the support of the surface of the crown beam. The following image shows the side wall completely built, while we see the installation of the tensioner that will be embedded in the bolt and in the crown beam. On the right, the flat concrete beam that crowns the wall and will support the catenary for the bolts. In the graph below, we can see how the 4 steel bars of the tensioner are inserted into the edge beam. Here we can see how the mobile formwork is installed to assemble the roof bolt by bolt, supported by hydraulic jacks that allow moving to the next position and folding wings. On the right, a detail of the construction of the cover of one would be near of the formwork. The mold is placed in the straight line with the tensor already installed on a row of brick slab that will leave the lower view above the industrial blocks, creating between them a wire net and the joints. Finally, layer of mortar, then waterproofing, a layer of sand and brick slab with pour mortar to allow evaporation and mobility. Once the building is finished, the mortar are cleaned. The facades are not tied to the structure and allow freedom in their design. The triangular parallelepiped in the exterior is the access of the baptistery. The main damage of the building has been caused by water, either due to the lack of the foresight at the time of the construction of the subway structures, or due to the lack of maintenance of the roof for more than 40 years. In the graph of 2017, part of the conservation plan carried out with the contribution of Getty Foundation, we detail the different affection of the roof. We see presence of lichens and well other microorganisms in the most humid areas, especially in the valleys, precisely where the tensors are located, with this increased risk. This led to a loss of cohesion of the pieces, greater infiltration, cracks, and detachment. We can see how the upper part of the bowl was in that moment, where the upper slab had lost the coherence and the waterproofing started to be affected. After a heavy rain, humidity stains are visible on the bolts, which persist with later, as seen in the camera with infrared thermography is applied. Less damage are visible in the survey of the walls. There is no presence of capillarity in the side walls since the building was built on a stone field of 1 meter high above the ground. However, the loss of the rainwater flow in the roof generates drip stains on the conoids with presence of microorganisms. Below we see efflorescence on the mortar line of the baptistery entrance cover. We can see in detail the damage caused by the filtration of the planter located on the dome of the baptistery, whose lack of maintenance caused even structural cracks. Also, the damage on the high water table levels with affectation staining completely the bricks. At present, the dome was repaired and the baptistery is being kept dry by mechanical pumping, while different options for controlling the water table are being analyzed. On the right, we can see an example of the exterior walls with oxidation, corrosion, and explosion of some metallic reinforcing wires. In this case, they don't represent a major risk because we find a net with structural continuity with other healthy wires around it. As this is a net, it is possible to replace the brick and reestablishing the connection between the areas of the metallic wires are not oxidized. A comprehensive repair of the roof was carried out 4 years ago. The situation of the tensor in all the areas with humidity was analyzed, which fortunately were not affected. The hydrophobic protection on the tiles were reinstalled, replacing the broken and damaged one with new pieces with similar capillarity indexes. To conclude, An aerial view of the church and its surrounding in 2019. Works continues with specific repair in the building and the study an alternative solution for the baptistery and the bell tower. This is a structure affected by external conditions, rain, sun, and wind, and has problems with the step since they were prefabricated. There are oxidation process in the joint with the walls. Finally, I would like to insist that any conservation or restoration action don't make sense if there are no programs to reinforce the value of the building to the community that use it. In this case of the estate, the work of an education program of game, reading, and interpretation methodology that help schools to generate feeling of belonging with the buildings and their construction process, materials, equipment, and work of professionals. We emphasize brick as a local and industrial material, which is still used in the area, and its conservation. I want to thank you very much for your attention to this presentation. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dr. Ciro Caraballo. We will now move to the last presentation and then have the question and answer session. After that, may I now please call upon architect Ludmila Pavlova-GIllham, who's going to be speaking to us about the buildings on the University of Massachusetts campus. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to try and get through this relatively quickly, given the wait, but I want to start just by saying how grateful I am to the many advocates at ICOMOS India, the NSC 20C, Kiran Joshi, Annabel Lopez, and the many others who organized this historic webinar. Hopefully you're hearing me.
Yes,
Yes, we do.
All right, great. The reason why we're here is partly because of the group that I'm part of, which we named ourselves UMass Brut. It is, and probably the award that we recently received. UMass Brut is a multidisciplinary campaign designed to reshape the brutalist architecture of the University of Massachusetts, and was awarded the Docomomo U.S. Modernism and American Award in the inventory category for our efforts in celebrating our modern heritage. The key to the success of the group is that we began by building a community of faculty experts, enthusiastic students, and open-minded administrators, and reaching out to alumni to foster pride in our campuses. On the right is a map of the 5 colleges in the UMass system. UMass Brut has advocates from Amherst and Dartmouth and is reaching out to partners in Boston and Lowell. The brutalist buildings at the UMass Amherst campus on the left are shown in purple. They reshaped the historic 19th century landscape of the university by creating an urban core around the campus pond and a dense housing complex in its southwestern corner. The Paul Rudolph Dartmouth campus is at its core an urban design in both buildings and landscape, and UMass Dartmouth has subsequently expanded toward the east. Like many other modern research universities, the University of Massachusetts campuses at Amherst and Dartmouth saw historic growth in their facilities in the middle of the 20th century. UMass Dartmouth was designed by Paul Rudolph in 1963 as the Southeastern Mass Technological Institute, growing to 5,300 students and 1.3 million gross square feet by 1979. UMass Amherst is the flagship of the system, established in the 19th century as the Mass Agricultural College. Under the Hideo Sasaki Plan of 1962, it more than tripled in size by the end of the 1970s to 24,000 students. Approximately half of all of the University of Massachusetts system buildings were built at this time. Why is UMass Brut here? I suspect it is because we are advocates who care about our cultural heritage and the historic legacy of modernism. Our group includes experts in art history, architecture, history, public history, and sustainability. Our campuses lack general education courses about the modern period, so we fill the gap. Our community has a negative perception of brutalist buildings as they continue to age and their condition deteriorates, so we serve as cheerleaders. We capitalize on recent trends in popular media and photography that offer some hope, particularly on Instagram, where brutalism is a hot topic, and the cats of brutalism delight and entertain. Let me just move to the next one. Sorry. Here we go. Why we're here. We are successful partially on the strength of our educational outreach. We reached out to the Amherst Library and Historical Society with Brute Bites in 2021, developed a website, award-winning graphics and branding, social media presence, and alumni articles, all with very small group of staff, students, and faculty. We hold annual exhibits and campus tours for admission guides, alumni, and visitors. And we held a 2-day symposium that attracted the attention of executive administrators and design professionals. As the COVID pandemic was slowly receding, we held a sold-out 100+ attendee event at both campuses that engaged esteemed faculty and professional speakers, attracted over a dozen corporate sponsors, and solicited opening remarks from executive administrators. The event was in a recently renovated space in the library at UMass Dartmouth. The Brutalism and the Public University Symposium and the Docomomo Award have brought us a level of prestige that makes others in the administration and development officers pay attention to our otherwise disparaged brutalist buildings. We structured the symposium in a manner somewhat similar to the way that this webinar is organized. We included presentations from faculty who teach brutalism as part of student engagement with their campus and with urban, political, and environmental history. We also showed ways to humanize brutalist interiors by improving lighting, interiors, and accessibility in a way that accommodates modern needs. We discussed designing for adaptation and sustainability and offered technical sessions on conserving concrete and emphasized material science. And we organized presentations by university staff and their consultants that articulated the maintenance challenges and efforts to address them, especially the difficulties that polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, at control joints pose for the cleaning and repair of concrete walls. Finally, we invited state administrators to tour the campus and consider ways to move forward that emphasize funding for reuse and adaptation. All of these presentations were archived and shared online via the ScholarWorks database, and we continue to refer to them in our public outreach, as well as in campus-wide outreach and engagement efforts. Sorry. This is the slide I was referring to. I apologize for not having forwarded. And we continue to offer multiple tours and guides to engage with the public at conferences hosted on campus for annual homecoming and alumni events and on Docomomo tour days. We have successful exhibits and are developing new ones that will travel to other campuses as a way of building a statewide constituency of supporters. And we continue to build a global network of allies who help us to stay relevant, share information about the modernist heritage, and also to be part of the social network of university administrators. I will concretely offer some case studies of recent renovations of modern buildings. This is an aerial view of the UMass Dartmouth campus, noting the location of the Claire T. Carney Library on the left and the Science and Engineering Complex in the middle. The 160,000 interior renovation and 25,000 addition to the Claire T. Carney Library by Design Lab Architects was completed in 2013 when the Paul Rudolph Design Facility was 45 years old. It enclosed the existing building with a new gallery that extends the north-south campus corridor, connecting the library to the Science and Engineering building. The project enclosed a multi-tiered exterior space and turned it into the social and academic center of the campus. It included concrete repair, accessibility improvements, colorful signage, and interior design that capitalized on a modern color palette for furniture, fabric, and tapestries. The design team also discreetly enclosed 25,000 square feet of formerly open-air space beneath the volume of the Rudolph Science and Engineering lecture halls. The 2022 renovation of the Science and Engineering buildings by Ellenzweig focused on roofs, windows, heating, and ventilation, and was financed by a combination of state and university funds. The team engaged in a robust conversation with the Massachusetts Historical Commission and the community around the replacement of the historic windows and curtain wall for the SENG building that could be applied to the remaining campus buildings. The project relied on phased renovations with swing space for occupants. The process incorporated concrete conservation strategies for mortar and concrete matching that will also benefit future repairs. This image shows the location of brutalist buildings by iconic modernist architects, such as the Campus Center by Marcel Breuer, if I can point right here, the Du Bois Library by Edward Durrell Stone, and the Fine Arts Center by Kevin Roche that constitute the modern core of the UMass Amherst campus. The FAC is a large 220,000 gross square feet monolithic concrete structure housing multiple performance venues and facilities for visual arts, music, and theater on the north, and are unified by the south, on the south by a monumental colonnade and bridge. The complex experienced multiple water infiltration issues, and past repairs to repair roof leakage at multiple locations have achieved varying degrees of success. There are also hazardous PCBs at control joints, which pose significant challenges for the repair of the exterior walls. The Arts Bridge renovation by Design Lab constituted a major reconfiguration of the interior spaces and was enabled by the previous construction of a studio arts building, which relocated a large portion of the bridge occupants. This image illustrates the way the designers turned the challenge of the 600-foot-long corridor into an opportunity for community building by the placement of social areas for students engaged in theater, music, and art studies. The decision to move the main corridor from the north side of the building was critical in the ability to adapt the classrooms in a way that permitted the addition of new HVAC systems. The horizontal skylights and roof drainage you see on the left of the section underwent a major renovation that permitted the public corridor to be bathed in daylight. This also retained the initial design concept of the building by Kevin Roche as a sun machine. The interior transformation you can see here from the existing image on the left to the new daylit and colorful intervention on the right was critical in improving the comfort of the faculty and students in the arts program. It also builds support for future renovations of our modernist buildings by making the complex more inviting to students and the public. I would like to close by noting that the maintenance and repair of public buildings under the care of the Massachusetts administration pose a significant challenge in terms of scale. As you can see from the graph on the right, higher education mid-century modern buildings comprise almost half of the state portfolio, shown in dark blue, and have documented construction problems. Each institution will struggle making decisions about how to manage program space needs in concert with capital investment in critical repairs, modernization, and growth. UMass Amherst is also currently engaged in a carbon zero campaign that aims to build new ground source thermal exchange districts, new carbon zero facilities, and to transition existing buildings from steam to low temperature hot water systems. This provides an opportunity to advocate for careful system upgrades and modernization of our mid-century modern facilities. It also elevates the importance of building reuse as a part of climate action. The UMass Carbon Zero Living Lab is an opportunity to partner with the Association for Preservation Technology and support research on the technical and material qualities of the reinforced concrete in two of our most iconic buildings, to calculate the embodied carbon associated with their construction, and to study carbon neutral alternatives for their adaptation. UMass Brut is now a partner in many campus improvement efforts. Its campaign is engaging with faculty researchers and leveraging partnerships with nonprofit institutions such as Docomomo and the APT to bridge the gap between academy and practice. And we engage with students, alumni, and the broader community to build a social network of supporters and watchdogs. As a public institution, we owe it to our stakeholders to lead the way on responsible stewardship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I made it on time.
You did. Thank you very much, and we're grateful. I think we have some microphone on. Yeah, that's fine. We'll now move on to the question and answer session and a wrap up of the learnings from this session today, the first session today. May I request all the speakers to turn on their cameras and be available. We are trying to collate questions that appear here on the chat box. Yes. So there's one question that we've received, and I would like to put it forward to Dr. Aishwarya Tipnis, and this is about the Doon School. There was a mention of some major earthquake retrofitting works in the 90s. In 1993, you had mentioned. If you could just take a moment to explain what was that and what did it have a positive effect on the building? Because again, Dehradun is sitting in a seismically active zone, which is
of course, Dehradun is sitting in a very seismically active zone 4 at the moment. And in 1993, when the Uttarkashi earthquake hit, there were several cracks that had appeared in the building at that point of time. So going by the knowledge that was prevalent at that time, they had introduced tie beams, RCC tie beams in most of the rooms. And in some cases, on some of the windows, they had introduced RCC lintels. Now, where we saw the cracking were the windows on top of which they had introduced this RCC lintels. And that was in the same section where the stepped classroom was also there. So it is the stepped classroom was before the earthquake. And then once they introduced these RCC tie beams, we saw the cracks. And the estate team told us that most of these cracks appeared after the retrofitting was done. But there were also other things that had happened around that space. They had added new staircases. So they had removed some walls, they had added some staircases, they had tried to put in some partitions, some shear walls and things like that. So all of that cumulative effort on one side of the building, we were seeing crushed toes and we were seeing that the building was sort of sinking from one side. But when we opened up the foundations, it seemed to be okay. And there was only one corner which was really facing the heat of it. And once the load was removed, there has been no problem after. I mean, the work finished in 2015, and we didn't see any issues thereafter.
Thank you very much on that. And it's interesting to note that it's in 1993 that all the earthquake retrofitting codes that the Indian standards have actually came out. So, you know, there must have been some experimentation on those buildings as well. Thank you. There is one question here, and let me put it across to Ludmila Pavlova. And this question is about, in the case of IIM Ahmedabad, how do you think the technical feasibility and stakeholder involvement, including the alumni, can be key?
I believe that because it's an institute of management, that the administrators feel very compelled to address the risk issues first and foremost. and they probably listen to their technical advisors. But I suspect that that desire to address the risk overweighs their fear of public recrimination. And I do think that the role that alumni and students can play is as cheerleaders to the management rather than as shamers. I think going back in discussions earlier about going back and looking for blame are sort of behind the ball, right? They might have happened and might have needed to happen a while back, but now it's too late. The focus should be on celebrating the work that was actually done for the community by the building of the School of Management. A focus on the 80% of the work that they do, which is to teach and to graduate important alumni who affect the work of business institutions worldwide. And then to use the lever of good management practices as a way of teaching a next generation of managers of businesses about the importance of capital projects versus business operation and how the two are linked hand in hand. The history, modernist history, can provide a basis for celebrating the impact that the Institute had with its construction, and then to continue emphasizing the importance that the facility can provide as a lever to bring alumni back, to bring the community back, and to celebrate the success of the institution. So understanding the business model of the school, of the Institute of Management, is just as important. And I think there were some speakers yesterday that talked about the importance of governance and the engagement with the building committee. All of those would be most successful at this point in time.
Thank you very much for that considered answer. Very quick question to Wessel here, and this is something very specific. Were repairs to the metal lathwork ever done, or was there any damage due to corrosion or other
in the spandrels, you mean? In the spandrels,
yeah.
You mean? Yeah.
Yes.
Most of those, no, there was no corrosion as such. The main problem was the lack of thermal insulation. And as I said, most of the facades had already been replaced in the 1970s. So the question really was to make a reinterpretation. But in the one section that I showed where the windows were still original, also the spandrel has been kept original. And since that cannot be thermally insulated, we moved that part of the facade to a hallway where there is no requirements for high temperatures. So we simply, or not simply, but we took the whole part of the facade and actually moved it to another side of the building with all the authentic materials in place, because the corridor is not heated, and that was feasible over there. It's also single glazed, that part. It cannot hold double glass.
Right. Thank you. Again, for want of time, I'm keeping the questions very specific and quick. To Ciro, the reinforcements in the roof forms, the double curvature of roof forms, was sitting in the joints, or was sitting in like a sandwich, I mean, in the cavity between the sandwich panels?
No, the reinforcements are wires, steel wires.
Steel wires running in all the joints.
In each of the joints in both directions. It's a net, but very, very, very thin steel wires.
And what is the nature of these wires? Is it, what is it, mild steel or?
No, it was a steel wire used in the 60s in Uruguay. A simple steel wire.
Steel wires.
They tried to respond to the other reinforcement of the roof. The bricks make the compression, the wires is the tension. But it's a net. It's a complete net.
Right. Yes, thank you. And one quick question to Jigna, and this is again about the involvement of the stakeholders and technical feasibility of working on the buildings there. How immense were the problems? How easily could they be tackled? instead of looking at a replacement of the facility, of the infrastructural facility?
I think everybody who's here knows that it's not easy to tackle any of these problems that are there, that these buildings throw to us, right from the point of the design and the intention, and to kind of conserve the intentions to the current requirement. There is a range of issues, and they're not easy to tackle. But what I think, what the reason why we were able to do it was that everybody who was working, while we had discussions with stakeholders who were on the periphery of the action, everybody who was acting was within the institute, and we were able to mobilize everybody from within the institute. And also the resources, for example, the conservation lab, if we were lacking in resources, we made sure we updated the lab to support the resources of the university, because the problem is not a one-time problem. We are going to be continuing to maintain the building. There are also other parts of the campus that will require similar things. So we kind of took this as an opportunity to build our capacities to live up to to respond to the requirement of conserving other buildings on the campus, continuing to maintain this building. And I think that was the reason why almost everybody, and it took time to speak to everybody and bring everybody on board. And as I told you, it was a 5-year process, but eventually, I think success lied in the fact that everybody who acted was within the institute. Our capacities are at a place where we can deal with this in future as well, and the investment was towards that. So right. I think that was the reason why we were.
I think coming from Jigna, I mean, that point is very important, that the institution and the buildings that we're talking about actually has the technical capability to address the problems in these buildings. Now, in IIM Ahmedabad, we're looking at a situation where you don't have architects and engineers working there, getting trained there. That's, I think, something that we have to deal with. Now, for want of time, I'm really going to summarize the key learnings from this session, this fantastic session, where we've had examples, such heartwarming examples of how you can take care of aging buildings, aging infrastructure, either look at adaptive reuse or look at continuing the original activity in these buildings, ensure safety, ensure functionality. But I would want to focus on 2 points, which for me have really stood out. And that is, it comes from the sanatorium, the example of the sanatorium Zonnestraal, which is very interesting when you said, Wessel, that there was a significant reconstruction happening in the building, partial reconstruction, of course, but which was done keeping in mind the intent of the original design, but with improvements brought in the reconstruction. I think this is a very important aspect, because one has to understand the time in which these buildings were built, the circumstances in which these buildings were built, the problems of construction quality that might have existed, and to retain the sense of the space these buildings create, look at partial reconstruction as an option where improvement of the typology, the issues that come along with the typology can actually be achieved. And I think there is a possibility to step up and retain the sense of the space, of the architectural space, but look at the technical aspects of the construction, which can give us durability, which is much more than what the original construction has been able to offer. So that's one very important point. Another important point, and I'm thankful to Ludmila for bringing this to the table across all the 5, and this is applicable across all the 5 case studies that we've seen today and the IIMA buildings, which is the whole world becoming more and more conscious about carbon neutrality, or understanding that upgrade and reuse, system upgrade and reuse definitely makes more sense than demolition and reconstruction, even reconstructing something larger, bigger, with better amenities. Simply because in demolition and in reconstruction, the amount of energy that is required and the amount of pollution that demolition itself can cause is something that we have to deal with. And as we move towards attaining Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, this is where we really have to take care and see that if you have buildings which have load carrying capacity, which has to be estimated, which are, of course, there may be problems in the material and there may be degradation, but it's possible to look at restoration and upgrade these facilities so that they cater to the current needs and we prolong the operational life of these facilities. And that's the huge contribution that the field of restoration, the field of conservation will be able to provide towards attaining Sustainable Development Goals that the world is really thinking seriously about today. So with that, I thank each one of you for this fantastic session. It gives a lot of hope, but it also gives us very concrete pointers as to where we should be focusing. I'm not getting into the kind of engagement we need with the different stakeholders, because that's not the purpose of this session, but with the learnings from what each of you have presented, I think we have a very rich input that we can give to everybody who cares about the buildings on the IIM campus. So thank you very much. And I hope all of you would be participating in the last session. And it's over to you, Professor Joshi. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun sir. We shall now be beginning the session 4. I'll just share my screen. Yeah. So hi everyone, we shall now begin the session 4, which is titled The Way Forward. I'm Apurva Iyengar, a conservation architect and visiting faculty at Kamla Raheja College for Architecture and Environmental Studies. The purpose of this session is to gather opinions and technical input to disseminate the critical role of value-based approach for identification of heritage assets, to consider immediate and subsequent steps to address key concerns at IIMA, such as the risk posed to preserving the authenticity and integrity of the place, to debate on various means of conserving its original buildings and campus layout, including identifying appropriate knowledge tools for interpreting, promoting, conserving, and valorizing built heritage of the recent past in general. The session may also dwell upon approaches to upgrading that can ensure holistic and sustainable conservation management planning, where the tangible and the intangibles would come together. Our co-chairs for this session are Ms. Kiran Joshi, architect, academic, author, and heritage advocate, and Ms. Annabel Lopez, architect, expert heritage management planning, and heritage impact assessment. Our speakers for this session, we start with Mr. Premchand Davarkar, Managing Partner, CNT Architects, academic, writer, and heritage advocate, followed by Javier Orosi, Architect, Program Manager, WMF, USA. This is followed by Ms. Malika Sarabhai, choreographer, dancer, activist, and also IIMA alumnus, India. Followed by Mr. David Fixler, Principal, DF Architecture Planning Preservation, USA. And then we have Ms. Uta Pottgiesser, Chair of ICOMOS International from the Netherlands. Followed by Ms. Teresa Patricio, Conservation Architect and President ICOMOS, Belgium. Followed by Mr. Kirti Shah, Architect and Founder, ASAG and INHAF, India. And then we have Mr. Naveen Piplani, Architect, Academic and President ICOMOS, India. And lastly, we have Ms. Susan McDonald, Head of Buildings and Sites at the Getty Conservation Institute, USA. Ms. Kiran ma'am and Annabel ma'am, over to you.
Okay, can you stop sharing? You.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Apurva, for that introduction. And indeed, the speakers today that we have in this group are indeed the best of the best. One couldn't have hoped for any better. And I'm quite privileged to be associated with this session. As regards my note on the session objective, part of it has already, what we wrote in our program has already been read out by Apurva. And further to that, all of us as a group, each one of us, has contributed also to elaborating these objectives, these early objectives that we began with, into certain issues that need to be addressed. And then, of course, later we converted them into actual themes which are being addressed here. And to kind of reiterate, the aims we began with talked about the critical role of a value-based approach, which we did yesterday. And then we also want to address all the risks that are posed to conserving the significance of this place, not just the significance of the built fabric, but everything else that is there. Then there is the question of various approaches to conserving living heritage, essentially considering the issue of change. So we talk about upgradation, adaptation, repurposing, adaptive reuse, and whatever. And finally, there may be some knowledge tools of which we need to be aware. How do we convert these into issues? So following this, we discussed and we found that certain issues that seem important, there may be many more. The first, again, was building awareness of a value-based approach to identification, as well as the conservation of heritage, and the layering of various values. Secondly, how to bridge the huge communication gap between the IIMA authorities, which is the major thing we are all confronted with, and all the others advocating conservation. How do we engage more community groups in the project? Then the technology of conserving exposed brick and exposed and reinforced brick, and the management of defects in the original material and construction. Some of these issues have already been kind of approached, already been discussed in the last session. Then conserving and managing change in heritage building. How do we go ahead with rehabilitation, adaptive reuse, repurposing, and reconstruction if necessary? Are there any ways to save unprotected community heritage? There are many more examples of similar to IIM. Then how to preserve if demolition does become inevitable. The value of, and we talk about the value of documentation and archival records that ICOMOS as well as DOCOMOMO has been stressing to the IIMA people. And finally, the value of conservation management plans for heritage buildings and place in use. And all these issues were converted into various themes that you'll see. So theme 1, we have Prem Chandawalkar talking about the ethics of 20th century built heritage. Theme 2 is promoting community engagement, which is being addressed both by Avier and Malika. Then theme 3, technology. We have David Fixler, who will give us an update of his recent visit to IIMA. Then we have Uta on that, and so on and so forth. So I won't take any more time, but I invite Prem to start with his input. Thank you. Prem?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll begin with the question, what markers should qualify built heritage? One prevailing opinion is age. For example, the government of India justified demolishing the Hall of Nations in New Delhi by saying it was less than 60 years old and therefore not heritage. But age is a nonsensical qualifier, for it implies that whatever future generations call heritage is whatever escaped demolition before the qualifying age. And in the interim, we may discard any contemporary recognition of value and demolish anything. Another opinion often found is that heritage offers a precious perennial authenticity, speaking to us from the past. This too is problematic to 20th century heritage. Barely a generation or two old, its modernity seems to connect more to the present than past, and therefore considered easily replaceable through contemporary effort. The fundamental problem in these conventional viewpoints is that they cast heritage as disconnected from present and future, with an authenticity purely in the past. This is what must change. Heritage must be seen as a contemporary continuum of choosing what is worth remembering, realizing that in seeking to remember across large scales of time, we are driven to consider what in our spirit must endure. Through the act of heritage conservation, we discern what is precious in what our ancestors have gifted us, leverage those gifts of history to raise our current spirit to its potential, and consequently account for how good an ancestor we shall be to the future. This places 3 ethical obligations on IIM Ahmedabad in defining the path ahead. Number 1, acknowledge what is at stake is the potential of our collective soul. IIMA acknowledges on its website that the Khan campus installs a sense of awe and wonder. Going on to cite Khan, quote, every time a student walks past a really urgent, expressive piece of architecture that belongs to his college, it can help reassure him that he does have that mind, does have that soul, end quote. This spirit is more than an aesthetic phenomenon. It infects the culture of inhabitation within the campus, shaping all who pass through its portals. While a real problem of deterioration of structural masonry elements must be tackled, evaluation of the future of the campus must center on awe, wonder, and soul, asking how they may continue to imbue its inhabitation. It would be lip service to praise the Khan legacy while subjecting the future to a purely material calculus. But sadly, that is what we are seeing thus far. Number 2, acknowledge the heritage audit as an indispensable best practice in any heritage project. Once we ascertain that awe, wonder, and soul are present, we must rigorously reify their presence through a heritage audit that documents tangible and intangible heritage. Tangible heritage would be documented in annotated drawings and photographs supported by text, identifying the qualities that mark the project as a heritage asset. Intangible heritage would be the documentation of how awe, wonder, and soul have reified over time in the project, supported by inclusive anecdotal histories from all the constituencies who have breathed its transcendental air in its making or inhabitation. The heritage audit should be the lodestar that guides all consequent decision and action. And number 3, acknowledge heritage as a public asset. Built heritage defines our civilizational potential and is therefore a public asset where the owner is at heart a trustee. Public assets require public processes with widest possible disclosure and consultation. This has been missing so far at IIMA, and it should be realized that heritage, in the way it publicly seeps into our cultural identity, is essentially a form of collective wisdom and must be managed on that basis. I'll end with a quotation from the late economist Kenneth E. Boulding from his classic 1966 essay, The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth. Quote, the welfare of the individual depends on the extent to which he can identify himself with others. And the most satisfactory individual identity is that which identifies not only with the community in space, but also with the community extending over time from the past into the future. If this kind of identity is recognized as desirable, then posterity has a voice, even if it does not have a vote. And in a sense, if its voice can influence votes, it has votes too. This whole problem is linked up with the much larger one of the determinants of the morale, legitimacy, and nerve of a society. And there is a great deal of historical evidence to suggest that a society which loses its identity with posterity and which loses its positive image of the future loses also its capacity to deal with present problems and soon falls apart. End quote. Thank you.
It was quick, Prem. Thank you for your opening remarks as well as keeping to the time. We'll take all the questions at the end. Some have already started coming in. So now can I ask KRVIA to come in, please?
Absolutely. Hello,
Yeah.
everyone, and thank you, Kiran. Let me share my screen very quickly. I hope you can see my slides. Let me actually move these two.
Yeah.
There you go. I know we have a very busy session, morning for me in New York, but evening for those of you in India. But I want to first thank ICOMOS India for the invitation, and Kiran and Annabel and the entire team for putting together this panel and this set of very interesting sessions. And before I start, I just wanted to share that when I was invited to participate in this meeting, in this panel, I really started thinking so much about how what ideas I could bring to this conversation that are relevant to the case of IIM Ahmedabad, and in regards of how World Monuments Fund works to really foster an inclusive conservation processes, to foster participation, to foster community engagement in our projects around the world. Because as you all know, we work everywhere in the world. We work at different types of sites, different types of regions, in places that have different construction methods and materials that present different types of issues and opportunities. Places, like Cambodia, Angkor, where we've been working for many decades, implementing conservation work at different temples. Also places like Uzbekistan, in Bukhara, where we are recently working on a project to map and document the traditional Bukharian houses in the historic center of Bukhara, to really bring new technologies in the documentation process, to be able to document and assess the physical state of these houses, and then develop conservation guidelines and strategies. And we also work at sites, at places of our recent past, like this one that you see on the screen. This is Ontario Place, a modernist mega structure built on 3 artificial islands in Lake Ontario in Toronto, where World Monuments Fund recently worked with our colleagues from the University of Toronto, the School of Architecture there, and the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, to really support their advocacy efforts to preserve this very unique place in Toronto. Or very recently, a place that I hope is very familiar to a lot of the people in the audience, which is the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Stadium, also in Ahmedabad. Here, with a brilliant group of stakeholders and team members, and the support from the Getty Foundation, we have developed a conservation management plan for the site. And these are just some beautiful images of the stadium. But the question to me was, how is all this work relevant to IIM Ahmedabad, and what lessons I can share with everyone here that are relevant to this case and connected to our experience working at these places. So rather than going side by side, I thought it would be more relevant, more beneficial to try to share and in a way a little bit unpack some of our methodology, how we work, and kind of the lenses that we use to look at these places through, and really kind of bring that the different kind of communities that are relevant and have a voice around these places. So in order to do that, I created this diagram that really, as all the work that we do starts with a cultural heritage site that really presents different challenges, situations, opportunities that require to be tackled through, as I said before, an inclusive process that brings communities around the decision-making process, that engages them to really inform the conservation planning process, and a very kind of diverse group of stakeholders to look at these cultural heritage sites first through the lens of the space. And this is essentially the physical fabric of the place, really looking at the architecture, at the urban fabric, at the architectural significance of the site, and all the site-specific, again, challenges and opportunities connected to that space. Then we also look at the site through the lens of the stories, which is basically the social fabric in this case. Every time we work at a site, that really gives us an opportunity to bring a lot of people together and to engage in many conversations, and in some cases, interviews and recording of oral histories. And this gives us the opportunity to document those stories, those that in a way human dimension that gives meaning to these places. And in many ways is the only opportunity to actually record those stories that have never been recorded before. So this is actually really important for us to bring those stories to the forefront of the site. And lastly, looking at the site through the lens of the ownership. So basically, really kind of bringing together the actual owners of the site, but also all those other stakeholders and community members who also have a sense of ownership over the site, even if it's not an actual real ownership, administrative ownership, and really kind of work with all of them together to build capacity and in a way develop leadership around the decisions that need to be taken over these places. So if we look through these three lenses at the different sites that I was just mentioning before, for instance, at the Patel Stadium, some of the very important actions that we did at the beginning in the first initial phases of the project was to really assess the physical conditions of the building, to really capture the physical changes that the site went through, to really create a foundation of knowledge about the physical space that really allow us to then propose changes and new master plan that in a way allows change, but allows it in a thoughtful and respectful way to the architectural and cultural significance of the site. Because this isn't about stopping change at the site, this is about managing the change in a, again, a respectful way. And this was exactly the same process that we followed also at Ontario Place, the mega structure that I was showing you before in Toronto, where with our colleagues from the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario and the University of Toronto, we were able to capture all the changes that the 3 artificial islands in Ontario Place went through over the years, again, to create a foundation of knowledge for future decisions. And then if we look at these projects through the lens of the stories, this also gave us the opportunity, these projects, particularly now in Ontario Place, this gave us the opportunity to record the stories of people connected to the site. And that includes architectural historians, current and past managers of the site, people who go there to just enjoy the spaces, the public space, the architecture, and really make those stories publicly available.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Yes, you'll have to.
Perfect. Yes, I'll wrap up in very quickly. I just want to show you a 30-second video that we produced as part of the process of really recording those stories and kind of using them also as an advocacy tool. We produced with our colleagues in Toronto a set of videos. So I just want to show you this 30-second video. Hopefully now you can hear it.
Yes. Yes.
It is such a unique example of a particular form of avant-garde architecture, and there are only a handful of them in the world. And if you have one, why wouldn't you keep it? Not only is the thing conceptually ambitious, it's actually beautifully executed.
So this is just an example of one of those interviews captured in just a 30-second video. We also engaged the different communities at Patel Stadium, and that included the cricketers, but also other people who use and benefit from the stadium, people who go there to practice other sports, yoga, who go there just for a walk, also the managers of the site. So these are just some images of those processes. And lastly, in terms of ownership, as I was saying before, this is the lens really to look at the sites through really the opportunity to create a collaborative leadership and bring together all the different key stakeholders that have a saying in the process, and that includes the local authorities, the heritage departments, professionals in the field, but also the actual owners and managers to really sit them around the table and be able to share ideas, aspirations, challenges. These are just some images of some of the workshops that we conduct in our projects to really kind of discuss together, again, in a collaborative way, all the different challenges and opportunities that these places present, but again, to do it together and collaboratively. And, you know, this is just an image of our team in Ahmedabad in India, meeting with the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation in the process of developing the conservation management plan for the Patel Stadium. So my last slide, if I need to think about the key takeaways of how we work and kind of the lenses that I was just sharing with you about space, story, and ownership, I would say that the conservation planning process certainly involves the physical fabric of a place, but we shouldn't forget that there is as important is also the social fabric, and that really engaging everyone who has something to say in the process can be a challenging process, but it's really worth it at the end. And I would really say that we all need to trust the process, because at the end it really works when we look at sites through the different lenses that involve the architecture, but also the people who care and manage these places. And with that, thank you so much, and I will be ready for questions at the end of the session.
I just want to confess and share with all the speakers that my team starts haranguing me to ask the speaker to stop if you overstep. So I'm also getting all this, you know, from my team. So please do try to restrict yourselves to the 7 minute. And Malika, we'll have Malika now. Thank you, Malika, for agreeing to join us. Let's hear you out.
Hi. I feel a bit out of place here because I'm neither an architect nor a conservationist. I suppose what I do have in my favor is that I grew up with seeing the IIM planned and built, and then had the privilege of studying there. I remember sitting on my father Vikram Sarabhai's lap as he sat on the carpet in my drawing room with Louis Kahn and trying to understand what they were doing and what they were drawing, and asking my father what they were building, and Papa explaining to me his dream of producing managers who could run public institutions, educational institutions, medical facilities for the people that would serve in nation building. What do I have to say? That when people talk of soul, yes, that is what this building is. I don't think anybody who has studied at the IIM, in the old campus certainly, can be indifferent to the amazing, soul-stirring, awesome presence that it had in the years that we studied there. I remember I was only 18 when I went to the IIM, but I remember saying to myself, how can one possibly not study hard? How can one not put one's best foot forward in a building like this? I have been part of the group trying to save these buildings since the news came that they were going to be pulled down. I think there is lots of community engagement. What there isn't is any kind of trust or transparency between the decision makers and those of us who wish to save it. Perhaps what we need to work out just now is to let the bygones be bygones. Let us not say so-and-so said this and so-and-so didn't do this. There is a new director there. Hopefully there is a new vision. There is so much expertise across the world. If we can go to the moon and if we can go to Mars, surely we can save buildings. I don't believe we can't, and I think we just have to, because this is the heritage of humanity. As a performer, I am often asked what tradition is and when does tradition stop? And I say today what I'm doing is probably creating tradition for the next generation. As Prem said, the 60-year rule is ridiculous because there are so many ways in which it can be broken or skirted to bring down buildings. There are buildings across the world, not so many, but there are, which are a heritage of humanity. They are a heritage that will become as important as the Taj Mahal if they are allowed to survive. And all I want to say to all of you is that for the sake of humanity, for the sake of our past, for the sake of our children's future, these have got to be saved. So let us try and engender a culture of trusting once again. It is urgent. And let us try and convince the authorities that it's not a question of if one can save it, but how one can save it. Kiran, I have given you 3 extra minutes, so go ahead. Thank you.
It was really lovely. And let's go on. And the next person on our list is David, who wants to share a unique experience.
Okay. Shall I start? Okay, I will share my screen. Everything working all right? Okay. Thank you so much, Kiran, for asking me to offer what few humble observations I can to explain to everyone. I was able to get on campus briefly on January 17th of this year to tour some of the works, and I understand it was made very clear to me that they are generally not allowing people on the campus, and so I'm going to try to give you the benefit of my very brief visit and some of the observations that I made. But I want to start by saying it is interesting the perspective that the IIM was interested in showing me, because I had a very enthusiastic and shall we say precise and energetic tour guide who was someone from facilities, and what he really wanted to point out was everything that has gone wrong with this complex. So we spent a lot of time touring cracks and defects and spalls and that sort of thing. But I would like to start, for those of you who may not have been here, with these 2 images of the one on the left of basically how you come into the campus, and then the one on the right, that same view up the street to the left there. This is although on the return back after our brief tour, for 2 reasons. One is the absolute awe that this complex inspires when you first see it. I mean, I was sitting in a car and my reaction was I just said, my God, I wasn't prepared for this. No one is. And so there's absolutely no question that this is heritage of the highest order that deserves everything we can sort of muster to try to save to the greatest degree possible. Having said that, if you look on the right, you see an example of many of the kinds of things that have started to go wrong. You've probably all seen this is an old repair on dormitory 16, not terribly well done, and they were quick to point out not only the existing flaws but corrections. So again, just to if you can see my cursor, I only really was able to go within the area sort of circumscribed here, the main academic complex and these buildings here and a little bit up and around to that point. So that was essentially the extent of my tour. So here on the left is a photo of the main plaza from a few years back. And then on the right, how that looks today, you can see that they've actually, this is the administration building. They've closed a lot, they've protected a lot of this. There's some works going on in here, and they've essentially closed the building. You see some spalling on the concrete. I mean, these, it is unfortunate that these problems are ubiquitous and everywhere. And I should say too, if those who have read the abstract of my talk, I say that without benefit of consultant's report, I have read the IIT Roorkee 9-page memo. So that much I am familiar with. And I have also, of course, read Errol de Souza's memo. And I should point out too that when I was on campus, it was in the last days of Errol de Souza's tenure, and it was just before his memo was released. So this is what I saw a lot of. I mean, it's clear that and many of these happen to be a couple of the arches where the amount of supplemental shoring is relatively minimal. But there's a lot of very severe cracking, and as you can see, real separation going on here because of the corrosion of the reinforcement within. No surprise here, but and again, you can also see up on the undersides of the slabs here where they've been taking the concrete off in order to do repairs because of the same issue of inadequate cover or just too much corrosion. Within the same building, it is an area of a repaired ceiling and some failing supports here under the, I'm not exactly sure what the construction of this is, but it's clearly in distress. And you do see a lot of spalled masonry here nonetheless. And here's some detail images, cracks and piers, problems with the corrosion within the lintels and the deterioration of the brick, and some exploratory removals that they've done here on the right that shows you the condition of the rusted condition of of what is within. Again, this is nothing you don't already know, but it gives you an idea as to its most recent some of the conditions at its most recent state. Going back over towards the between the library and the classroom building. If you look close, there's a lot of spalling brick. There are the same cracks under the arches here. That continues right down this pier like that. So it's all things that are ultimately fixable, but certainly very extensive and very ubiquitous. So you can see all of the planes here, and as well as some wood windows that could use some work as well. Going around touring the back of the classroom buildings and towards the dormitories, the very sort of patchwork effect of the brick, which in some ways is sort of poetic, but it's in some cases it gets pretty egregious at the same time. And of course, the evidence of the sort of attempts at climate control through all of these mini split units behind the classroom on the photograph on the far right. And then a detail of a particularly unsympathetic brick repair along one of these walls. And again, looking here near the classroom building, and this is if you look closely, all of the parapet level brick is going. Again, no surprise, but something that they pointed out and said it just keeps getting worse and worse. So I'm going to be, as I say, very brief because I know I was sort of shoehorned in here at the last minute, but I wanted to at least show you this and to echo a couple of the sentiments of the earlier speakers, and particularly Ludmila's closing remark about the idea that in dealing with these kinds of problems. I've had over 35 years of working with high-powered academic institutions on renovating and restoring their buildings. You do have to tell good stories, you have to remain upbeat, and you can never cast aspersions and blame. It is always has to be done in the spirit of being supportive, understanding, and frankly, at times flexible, at all times flexible. And I'm hoping with that kind of an attitude and enough of a sort of a buildup of noise in the background of support for this kind of thing, that we will, in fact, in the end, be able to come up with a reasonable and effective solution for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javier. That was very fascinating, I must say. And we go on to Uta, who has, I think, prepared her presentation together in consultation with David, and of course taken care of all the other documents like the IIT rookie report and whatnot. Over to you, Uta.
Yes, thank you so much, Kiran, and I will share my screen. I hope you can see my screen, I hope. Yeah, thank you, everybody, and also particular to David, who has also shared the last impressions. And I was asked in my role of Docomomo chair, but also in my role as a professor in heritage and technology, to particular talk about the brick and the reinforced construction and about managing damages. At the same time, I must say that I was very impressed by some of the statements and presentations we saw yesterday, but also today, who again showed us the very importance of a holistic approach, as it was mentioned also just before in the presentations, and to be aware of the particular importance of also the role that the brick in particular played in building this whole complex up. And I'm just sharing two different images from two different, I think, years, which also, of course, show the changes that were undertaken related to repairs, but also related to the impression that the brick makes, maybe in different times of the year and at different times of the day. But I allowed myself to share two more slides or screenshots that I took yesterday from the presentations here, which I think is really important, for two reasons. I mean, for the cultural dimension that was mentioned, that was explained yesterday by Amrit in his presentation about how the brick was playing a role in the whole design process together with the National Institute of Design. So for its cultural dimension, but at the same time, it will be very important to look at the brick as a technical dimension, because all these bricks, and that was shown in many more slides, were produced on site and with local material and in a kind of hands-on procedure. And I will come back to that aspect in the next point when it comes to maybe the technical implications that might have. And I was also very impressed, nevertheless, by the reports, and we heard some of them, 2, 3, 4, of persons, people, alumni that have studied and have lived in the buildings, and that confirmed actually that historically, but even now, these places and spaces are in a way functioning and are well perceived, and that of course there might be changes needed in adapt them in terms of safety, in terms of comfort, in terms of function, but that it is nothing that is impossible. And yesterday here, Meenakshi made the point that she said, well, probably the structural safety is just an argument that is maybe not the real argument. And my main slide actually is this one. David was already mentioning the report that was issued by IIT Roorkee in September 2021. referring to the repair works that were done in the last period from 2016 to 2020. And there were, even though there are some critiques, there are also points that really, from a technical perspective, show a way. So what they say, there is deterioration, of course, and we can observe it. There is an explanation that it is maybe due to the fact of a missing protective layer, for example, plaster, but there might also other reasons, and that may lay in the brick itself. That was produced on site, and the IIT Rookie report really refers actually to these kind of investigations that still have to be made. So what they say is that there is the assumption, and that is also still visible, that the reinforcing bars are completely corroded and having a negligibly structural contribution. So that the structural capacity is questionable. That is what is also one of the main arguments. That there are serious damages that should be addressed immediately. Actually, and they confirm that the method that was used before is correct, and that they should be used again. So they confirm also, to a certain extent, the working of the repairs. The structural, and that is important now, the structural analysis should be based on in situ properties of the masonry and the reinforced concrete. Because so far these were rather a theoretical assumption. Also more important, that also the material qualities, so the brick itself, have to be investigated. So there are still a lot of question marks in the technical aspects that we have to, that we can tackle. Assumption is also that the repair and retrofitting may impact the spatial configuration, but it doesn't say it is impossible. It just says we have to investigate that to improve the structural safety. And well, what they say is that also most of the repairs of the concrete were quite successful, but that the reinforced masonry is more difficult, or let's say that the procedures are also more individual, but they don't say it's impossible. And of course, there are new problems that are appearing, but that could be addressed with the same method, with the same repair methods as before. So overall seen, this report also still offers a lot of opportunities and confirms that repair is possible. And I'd like to actually also end my presentation with a project or a conference that we had held in 2014 about the collaboration of architects and engineers and artists, and with that about the perceived technologies in modern movement and how important the cooperation of the different parties will be to achieve a good result. And I think this is the same call that was made by many of my colleagues, that we should look forward, that we should look for the best practices that we can also see in the IIM Ahmedabad with the repairs already made, and that there is a way forward, also echoing what David was saying, that it needs a very trustful and in a way confidential way of communication. And I think and I hope in particular the colleagues in India are able and will be able to do that. And I'd like to thank you with this last slide.
Thank you, Uta. That was lovely. And we'll quickly go on to our next speaker. That's Teresa. Teresa, can I invite you to come on board?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kiran. Allow me perhaps first to start by thanking KRVIA and ICOMOS India for organizing this conference. And of course, I want to congratulate you with incredible presentations that we had during these 2 days. As you, Kiran Joshi, told yesterday, ICOMOS and our International Scientific Committees of 20th Century Heritage issue in January 21 a World Heritage Alert that is in fact our most consequent expression of concern, to amplify awareness of the threat to the IMI old campus, and to draw urgent attention to the imminent risk of loss of these internationally significant buildings that make up the cultural landscape designed by Cannes. Following the first alert, the damage facing in IIMI remain acute. And so this first heritage alert was reaffirmed again by a second one, and this time also with the support of the COMOMO. And it was last December 22, following the declarations of the adopted options of reconstruction of some of the buildings. So many details were presented during these 2 days. We had incredible presentations, and I'm not going into many details, but I think I'm going more echoing many of the ideas that were presented. And perhaps as a president of ICOMOS, it's better to focus more on the general approach. So normally, as defended by ICOMOS, by UNESCO and many other organizations, heritage is the cultural legacy which we receive from the past, which we live in the present, and which we will pass on to future generations. So in the last century, was prolific in terms of construction, in quantity and in diversity of typologies, but also in quality, which advanced research and conceptual and technical innovations, where prototype versus recurrent productions are to be enhanced. So its architectural heritage is still proportionally poorly recognized. And in this context, the notion of heritage is important for 20th century architecture because it constitutes, in fact, the future cultural potential of our contemporary societies. Likewise, it contributes to the continuity of identities, contributes to the transmission of experience, skills, and knowledge between generations. And besides, heritage is also a source of inspiration for creativity and innovation that generate contemporary and future cultural properties. So one might ask now, what is the contemporality of today that we want to legate for tomorrow? This being said, 20 cultural heritage by their characteristics is often confronted with issues of radical renovation, transformations, demolitions, and reconstructions due to the fact that they no longer meet the needs of reasonable comfort and modern demanding. We discussed that during these 2 days. But normally, before deciding on a demolition or a replacement of architectural components, there are angles of approach to be taken into account and to be evaluated at the scale of each project. And we had wonderful examples yesterday and today proving that this is possible and that this is the way of working. I would say the heritage values, tangible and intangible, in line with the economy. Kiran Joshi referred the value of use, the cost of materials, but also, of course, and very, very important today, the costs measured on carbon emissions. We talked this in the sessions as before. And these among others. So heritage values in line with economy, as well in line with the durability of structures and the materials. The sustainability of the function is also very important. The urbanity of the place, the social environment, the communities and the users. And I would like it also to put here, don't forget the stakeholders, but also the right holders. So this allows a real assessment with various evaluation criteria, putting different heritage values in relation to other values, understanding the expectations of the various stakeholders and right holders, comprehending different narratives, material and immaterial, and so preparing an all-inclusive diagnostic of the state of conservation. And so this allows to confront the possibilities of conservation, rehabilitation versus demolition or reconstruction. It allows, let's say, a tailor-made evaluation and introduce heritage issues of integrity and authenticity together with issues of conservation, protection, reuse, repurposing, and eventually adaptive reuse. The dormitory buildings we just saw are significant in their own right. However, they also contribute to the equally significant collection of Cannes architecture. So all components here are inextricably interconnected. If the integrity of parts is lost or weakened, the integrity of the whole, architecture, construction techniques, and intentions will be likewise also degraded. So managing cultural heritage today imposes holistic approaches. We spoke already also about that. Today is about ensuring that heritage plays a dynamic role in society and that it not only exploits, but also offers to others the mutual benefits that such a role can create. And of course, for ICOMOS, only a comprehensive conservation management plan for IIMA Old Campus can succeed to address the conservation and rehabilitation of the buildings, campus plan and landscapes, together with the current pragmatic conservation and reuse methods. So balancing the current needs of today and of tomorrow, whilst maintaining this iconic built heritage. From a campus planning and architectural perspective, the IIMA holds indisputable great international importance and outstanding significance. It acknowledged an iconic character highlighted by the historiography, becoming a significant reference locally and international. And these, of course, because of the architecture, urban planning, landscape design, original proposals also. So improving value-based approaches and developing further the notions of cultural significance, of authenticity and integrity in relation to the repurposing and adaptive reuse must be, for me, the fundamental objective when establishing the long-term capacity program, but also maintenance program and management of the campus. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. And questions are pouring in now, so we must leave a lot of time for that. Can I ask? All right, Kirti Shah, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please, Kirti.
Can you see me? Can you see me?
No.
Why?
So we'll run your PPT for you.
Yeah.
Apurva, can you please come in?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think unlike Malika, I'm an architect and I've just produced a book called Conservation and the Indian City, Bridging the Gap. I still feel completely misfit in this meeting, especially because I heard the previous session. It appears to me that I am a kaval in a Shastriya Sangeet, myth. But that said, and I think that is based on what I'm going to talk about now. So first of all, thanks to the organizers, especially Kiranji, for this opportunity to be a part of this distinguished group and make this presentation. I have 7 minutes, and I've complained many times about the 7 minutes, and 2 separate presentations. Let me start running. But this presentation is on IIM Ahmedabad. When the debate on IIM's dormitory was on a high pitch, I wrote 3 letters to the IIM management.
Can you show the next slide, please? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
I wrote 3 letters to IIM management telling them what to do. I'm sorry, but yes, I wrote them letters saying what to do. I did that in my capacity as an architect who has asked questions about the profession all 50 years of my working life. Also as a concerned citizen of Ahmedabad, whose development trajectory mattered to me. And most especially because I felt the debate was a bit skewed somewhat in the air and missing some critical ground point. So based on this three, I wrote 3 letters to the IIM people. And today what I'm doing is sharing with the distinguished group of experts and specialists 9 of the points I made in that letter. I'm just going to repeat what I said in that letter. My first this, that I agree with many that IIM Ahmedabad campus is a great building and an iconic masterpiece. These buildings are monuments to human creativity and awe-inspiring for their form, aesthetics, elegance, and human scale understated grandeur. They are special too, as they speak a language that talk and relate with each one who sees, stays, or works there with a soothing message of harmony, peace, equality, inspiration, and quiet efficiency. The designer's success lies in imparting a tranquil personality and a vocabulary that speaks of his noble function, that is learning, education, training, and leadership development. The monastery imagery is apt. Only a few buildings do that, and it is a rare achievement. It's a creativity at its best. It is also a societal wealth and therefore deserves preservation and care. I took time to say this because everything else that I may say may look like contradiction, but I believe very strongly that these are absolutely great buildings. Second point I made in my letter to the IIM, I, however, was unable to understand fully what the intensity of concern that was on display on the IIM's modification alteration plans was not visible, even partly in the case of much bigger and much higher scale changes going on in Delhi at the Central Vista. It was being reorganized, redesigned, and reconstructed. More importantly, it had greater heritage value in the sense that it is a people's and the country's heritage, 1,400 million people's heritage, with much longer and deeper history, memory, and sentiments woven into it. And then I asked, had it something to do with whom one was interacting with or protesting against? Was the state power on display too much to question? So that was my second point. My third point was that I had a more fundamental question to ask, not whether to repair, retrofit, retain, demolish, or rebuild, but why was the iconic building in such a deplorable mess so early in its life? And a more loaded question, who was responsible for the state of distress just 40, 50, 60 years down the line after the buildings were constructed? It was emphasized that these questions were relevant and as all involved were big names, whichever everyone saw it, big institution, big clients, big architects, big local support team, big money, big contractors, big consultants, and a prestigious building. All this were big. And why do we have this problem? My point 4 was an unaskable, mundane question. And that is, I wrote, though it is not customary to ask questions of big, famous, and world-renowned architects, planners, and designers, with all due respect, in all humility, and all reverence intact for them, let me ask a few questions. First, did they know that the exposed brickwork in this part of the world have problems both due to salt oozing, climate, and rain lashing? IIM director's letter says that the bricks used were of inferior quality. Why were the inferior quality bricks used? Was it a budget constraint or non-availability of good bricks? It was known that the bricks were inferior quality. Why were they not protected architecturally? So and forth, I asked many questions. My fifth point is on maintenance of the building. Was the building maintenance manual prepared and provided by the architect to the institute? Was that followed, especially as vulnerability was inbuilt in the design in form of exposed brick load-bearing structure? The sixth point is on public accountability of big names in the profession. I said, far too long in the name of fame and celebrity professionals have escaped accountability. Public loss have been pushed under the carpet because big names are involved. And I'm saying asking these questions is not irreverence or disrespect or denial of their contribution. Greatness as suggesting achievement is not to be discounted. All that is great, fine. This is seeking professional accountability. Times are changing for good or bad. Small farmers are asking questions about public policy and wisdom of the authority and the government in power. Public good cannot be at the mercy of unquestioning reverence. My seventh point is my suggestion for a public inquiry to learn what happened, who did what, and why a public building of such repute, investment, and use was in such a distress so early. The city and the country needed mechanism of public scrutiny for such projects and investment. It is not running down anyone or anything. It's understanding, learning, improving, reforming, and changing system, changing ways of working, and of course, changing public accountability. My point 8 was on launching an open-ended global competition in search for new ideas, especially focused on the young and designed in such a way that allowed entry to the unknown and uncelebrated designers. And my 9th point was probably funny, considering the elite group to whom I was addressing. I said, let me suggest inviting local experts, especially of the informal variety, to find what is wrong. In the final analysis, the problems are leaking roof, cracking walls, disintegrating bricks, water seepage in monsoon, falling concrete, and opening joints. In whichever language that is mystified by the experts and the consultant, let it be said that it is not rocket science. And the traditional craftsmen who know and work with these materials and have done construction for decades are often better equipped to analyze and advise in the matter. I'm suggesting to seek advice of good and experienced masons and even chote tekidar, small contractors, the children of the lesser god in this profession. I added, and this is my last thing, if the allopathy is not working,
I'm requesting you to please wind up. If you have 2 minutes, please.
Yes. I added, if the allopathy is not working, at least try homeopathy and Ayurveda before leaving the patient to suffer and die. My second presentation, can you bring in the slide?
Kirti, I'm sorry, we'll have to stop.
Okay, fine. I'll leave my second. Okay,
I promise we'll take that up separately.
Okay, no problem. No problem. Thank you. No problem.
Thank you so much for this.
No,
okay. All right. Naveen, can we ask you to come in?
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm very honored and privileged and thankful to all the speakers who have spoken before me. Now, what to conserve, why to conserve, how to conserve, potential solutions have all been shared over today and yesterday with great passion and with great knowledge also. I must admit that the reason and the approach to conserving IIMA campus, there is no dearth of knowledge, there is no dearth of expertise, there is no lack of will, there is no lack of availability of skill, etc., etc. The unfortunate thing is that is on the side of the solution, and what we are addressing is the side of the problem. And there, that thinking or that openness or willingness is perhaps limited or not there for the moment. The entire international community and national experts have knocked on the doors of IIM management. We have made our intention absolutely clear, and I think quite in quite strong words as well. So to say that the conservation and preservation of the site is a very difficult proposition, is an unfeasible proposition, it does not quite hold strong footing, assuming the expertise and the knowledge that is available in a collective manner. It is possible, though, that expertise in conservation of brick and reinforced brick construction system, load-bearing manner, may not be as advanced in the Indian context as it perhaps is in other parts of the world, but those expertise can be brought to India, as was the original architect of the building, who was brought to India to construct this magnificent edifice. Now, so that argument has already been made, and by several people. My task or my presentation today is that if the reasons for conservation and preservation of IIMA are as compelling, then perhaps the reasons for not adhering to the conservation practices and moving towards the idea of demolition of the parts of the building are also perhaps as compelling from the other side. Now, we are not on the other side, we are on this side. But there may be people who are on the other side, and there may be few of us who are on both sides. Now, giving that benefit that the owners and the users who are finding it difficult have taken that compelling decision to kind of demolish and rebuild and all that, and they are not willing to listen to us. They are not willing to accept the argument that it can be conserved and preserved, and all ears are now closed. Where do we go from here? Do we keep knocking on their doors? Do we keep shouting and screaming? Do we do activism? It's not working, or at least it doesn't seem to be working, and that is why this webinar as another effort in that direction. Now, if that is the case, then still one has to find a probable solution where whatever is left and whatever is going to go, God forbid, that is also preserved in some form for the future generation. And the only possible solution that is in front of us with that same excellence in conservation and preservation techniques is conservation documentation, analysis, and getting to the evidences of how it was built, the archival records, the conversations. As Malika ji in her presentation said, I mean, those are interesting stories as well as the stories involved in the construction and the living life of the campus. Now, that is the second best option that we have. The first best option is, of course, to keep it, but if that is closed, the second best option is how to keep the memory and the record and the stories and the drawings and the vision and the rest of it. Because if we don't do that also, and we keep hoping that we will be heard, in no time we will have a flat piece of land and everything gone, including the documentation and the drawings and the stories, etc., etc. Now, INTAC's charter, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, which looks at the unprotected heritage sites of the like of IIMA, does suggest that if a building has outlived, if a historic structure has outlived its significance in consultation with all stakeholders, including INTAC, then one of the possible ways is to let it go, or let it remain and let it meet its natural end, in line with the philosophy of reincarnation and live, grow, die, relive, etc., etc. But in this case, the natural death is not happening. The site is being forced to die. So, though the article suggests that if that is the situation, and in consultation with all concerned stakeholders, including INTAC and all other experts, the demolition must be allowed only after undertaking a comprehensive documentation of all valuable and significant components of the cultural resource. Now, one has to also define what do you want to document. You can't start documenting brick by brick every building. It's a huge complex, and we are running against time. It may just be like the fate of Hall of Nations, that overnight it just went, and we could only rely on what the original designs were in the offices of the architects. As conservationists, we were not able to do our bit in preserving the memory and the values. So if we are at that stage, and that is what ICOMOS India has been quite forcibly asking IIM management that, look, if you've taken that decision, we are offering to prepare a conservation management plan towards conservation of the site. However, if those doors are now completely locked and there is no entry, then from the other side, the argument on the other side is that we are still wanting to reiterate again and again that if all approaches, leaving not a single stone left unturned, if all approaches to conserve are found inadequate, then and only then the documentation of original design, elements, materials, craftsmanship, the construction system, structural innovation, everything else that went into the construction, conceptualization, delivery, etc., of this magnificent complex by Louis Kahn, all that has to be undertaken as an intrinsic part of conservation process or demolition process or rebuilding process and so on and so forth, as a means to preserve the intent, the vision, and the strategy of Louis Kahn in India, as that would also help build the story of Louis Kahn's intent, vision, and strategy of his architectural approach all across the globe. So we will be kind of documenting a bit in the larger story, if at all we have to lose what we have in hand. And this is the position that we are now
taking. To interrupt you, but your time is up, please.
Yes. So this is what I would say, that this is the position that we are now taking, that if at all the situation is that we are going to lose it, then let's not lose the opportunity to comprehensively document the values, the design, the strategy, the vision, and the rest of all that went into the construction and building of this Louis Kahn's masterpiece in India. Thank you.
And the last speaker of the day, Susan, we are back to you.
Thank you, Kiran. And wow, what a really wonderful couple of days that we've had. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging the many highly skilled Indian and international professionals who've been already undertaking excellent work at IIMA, following all the recognized practices that we recommend, planning, investigation, trials, pilot projects. We know that some of this work has sometimes been compartmentalized and curtailed, and it's not always been possible for people to speak freely and collectively, which has contributed to some of the challenges, I think. So many of the world's leading universities boast campuses of great heritage significance, which enriches the educational experience. And so too, the old campus at IIM provides this really unrealized potential to contribute to the learning and the life experience of its inhabitants. Clearly, to retain the function, the status, and the vibrancy of IIM as a premier educational institution, it may need to grow and change to sustain its use and meet the evolving needs typically faced by educational institutions worldwide. The educational purpose and use of IIM is, of course, its primary value. And as we've talked about a lot, conservation is always about managing change, and there's no dispute that places need to evolve. However, as also been said, once places have been publicly recognised as being of value to broader communities, managing that change needs to be undertaken in ways that recognise and preserve its significance. So my observation is at the heart of this dilemma was really this missed opportunity to undertake a conservation management plan, or CMP, prior to developing a site master plan for both parts of the campus, and these planning issues seem to be key. So why are people continuing?
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. Do you want me to share your presentation?
Oh yes, you can start this slide at any time. Now is great. Thank you.
Okay.
So why are people continuing to propose a conservation management plan? What is a CMP? Why is it important here? I'm going to do a 1-minute recap on this process for those of you who are less familiar with it. So a CMP is a standard methodology for caring for heritage sites. It's well used internationally, and it really just provides a roadmap for the care of places deemed to be of heritage significance, and thus demanding that conservation is embedded at the core of how that asset might be managed. And I've just got the best quote about this by James Semple Kerr. And could I have the next slide now, please? So here is the standard diagram that illustrates the CMP process. And as we know, it starts by understanding the site as a totality, then identifying all those different values that we've been talking about the last few days, tangible and intangible attributes that contribute to the significance. And that's the starting point or the benchmark for planning change and decision making. And I don't have time to go through all of this, but I think it is really important to say that stakeholders are absolutely vital to the success of these exercises and need to be identified and understood and engaged in all stages of this work. What a CMP exercise would do here, it would help reveal the values, including the design and the aesthetics, but beyond that, and look at use, meanings, associations, and inevitably recognise the role of IIMA in relation to the cultural and educational life of the city, and the role of the many architects and engineers, patrons, contractors, faculty, alumni in shaping the institution and making what it is today. Given that significance is tangibly expressed in fabric, a clear understanding of all the components of the site, the dormitories, the faculty housing, the servants' housing, the landscape is needed, and how all of these different components contribute to significance. We've really been focused on the dormitories, but there's much more at stake here. Such an exercise provides a basis for identifying where change can be accommodated, where new buildings can be located, which views and vistas needs to be retained, what approach to the new buildings should be taken in terms of their scale, their density, their architectural language, where conserving existing buildings is an imperative, which buildings can be adapted to new uses. And with the new campus across the road, there was, but is there still any potential to manage the necessary growth across the whole site? So whilst there is a good CMP for part of the site, expertly prepared by highly competent professionals, it's constrained to the area of the library and adjacent teaching and faculty blocks, a fragment of the whole, but it is a starting point. So, I think the fact that the Getty's invitation to the IIM to apply for a grant under the Keeping It Modern program to initiate a CMP for the whole site was not taken up does provide this clue that it's not really just about the money. So second to the planning problem is that relating to the various intertwined technical challenges. And whilst we have some various expert reports, they're not always conclusive, they're partly conflicting. And a CMP could also tease out how to prioritise the material conservation challenges, the needs and the approaches, because some of these are undeniably quite difficult. We offered a few years ago to organise with IIM and fund a highly expert meeting of engineers, architects and other experts to examine and discuss these complex technical challenges related to reinforced masonry, seismic, material challenges related to the bricks, mortars and concrete, because we thought that bringing together the best local, national and international minds, it's often possible to solve seemingly unreconcilable problems. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to end by offering up some thoughts for what they're worth. And perhaps some people will think they're presumptuous, futile or naive, but I always remain an optimist until the very last. So firstly, undertake the much needed CMP to undertake the significance of the campus and all of its attributes, the planning, the landscape, the building, tangible and intangible attributes. Is it too late? Have we already lost too much? Or is there some way to honour what remains? Regardless, it could be a basis for interpretation. 2, use the CMP as a basis for revisiting the flawed master plan for the campus as a whole. The campus will be better off for it. There are likely many more opportunities that would emerge as part of such an exercise. We need to be encouraging world-class planning for a deservedly world-class institution. If it was considered worthwhile, I offer again today to work with IIM to bring together the world's best technical minds, including India's best, those esteemed colleagues that have already worked to understand the highly complex technical challenges. Can we determine what's possible? What are the implications of that in practical terms? What's not possible? We have conflicting technical reports and views. Imagine what could be achieved if there was an opportunity for discourse and collective problem solving. So I offer again to fund and work with IIM to fund such a group. It's an approach that we use sometimes when the problems are very complex to usually good effect. But really, if there's no will for these things, then it's an imperative that full documentation program described by Naveen, including oral histories, be instigated of what's left of the campus and all of its aspects before it's lost. Oral histories that tell the story of the place's design and realization and occupation also need to be undertaken before it's too late. Next slide. Number 5, develop an interpretation plan that explores and celebrates the significance of the site of a whole and tells the story of a campus. Integrate interpretation across the site in any new development and in student orientation material online, etc., etc. 6, develop case study on lessons learned for use in teaching materials for conservation programs, but also in IIMA's management courses. The conservation planning process echoes the typical business management processes, and there are many interesting learnings and parallels that could be explored here. 7, I know I'm going a bit outside my brief here, but I think this sort of highlights the need to protect the many other significant modern heritage places in the extraordinary city of Ahmedabad. It has a rich legacy of modernity, which is a great feature of the city. And then lastly, urge the municipality to work to develop a program and policies for conserving its modern heritage individually and as part of the history and vibrancy of the city. So I just want to say thank you very much. It's been a really wonderful, vibrant and rich 2 days and a great privilege to have been with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone. Hello. Hi, can you hear me? Okay, all right. So thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone. Interestingly, we are running about half an hour late. So therefore, I'll quickly run over the questions we have. Many of them have already been answered. They've been asked and answered by others. I'll just pick out 2 that seem to be important for everyone. The first...
Sorry, ma'am. Can I please ask all the speakers to switch on their video, please?
Of course, there were several questions and I'd already listed out one for each one of you. But let me now pick out, in view of the time constraints, let me pick out some. The first is to Teresa. Of course, this can be answered by others also, but I thought we'll and this is from Jagatjit Singh. He says, is there any way UNESCO, ICOMOS, INTAC, and other specific heritage protectors can proactively connect with owners of Desai heritage sites and guide them continually on how to preserve and protect. So what is the ICOMOS policy on that? How to imbue the owners with the responsibility of preserving heritage? In fact, the second part of the question should go to Javier, and somebody else has talked about that. So, I mean, this is a question which people would often have. Why can't, if ICOMOS, INTAC, whoever, why don't they just come in and step in and, you know, take over and tell these people what to do? So how do we deal with that?
Of course, and this is many times I tell that this is also a little bit the role of perhaps of our national committees, and this the reason is so important meetings as you organize this one today, but especially when it's possible to organize meetings with the different stakeholders, not only the specialists, but the people that are really in relation with the project and with the problems. And ICOMOS is always open to participate to meetings, both like we did today here, both with the National Committee or with colleagues from other countries. So, but there is, of course, there is a need for them to ask us also, because we can't impose them. We can sensibilize them, and this is the reason we wrote our letters. For me, Heritage Alert is like, let's say, the last step. I think we can develop a kind of a cultural diplomacy before arriving there. And this we have in many countries happen already, that we try to contact the government or local institutions or local organizations to discuss with them. This is absolutely possible, of course.
Okay, I hope that satisfies you.
UNESCO is a little bit different, but I don't know if there is someone from UNESCO with us today. But
no,
UNESCO normally goes on response of a request from the state party, from the country itself. So it's normally UNESCO intervenes in a different level.
Yeah, and Uta has left, so we have no one from Docomo here either, unless, of course, Wessel can take that on if you want, since you are here.
Yes, I don't know if I'm audible because I'm on the ferry boat right now.
Yeah.
And I'm using my telephone to make a connection. I'm on my way home. Yeah. Well, I think involving the public at large is really important. You know, advocacy is where it all starts. Start with youngsters. I mean, students, school kids. You know, they are the future, and we need to invest in them to prevent things like this happening in the future again. I feel that the alumni, it's a pity that they are not, there's not an association of IIMA alumni. That's but why can't we try to create one? I mean, through LinkedIn and so on, it's perhaps possible to mobilize a group of people to put some pressure on the whole thing. And I think, you know, alumni really have a say in this. You know, it has been their educational environment in their forming years. So I think that would really be a strong argument. And I believe, you know, if you only go by the arguments of architectural merit, I don't think that's enough. We've seen that with the Zonnestraal Sanatorium as well. You know, the Sanatorium is also a chapter in the history of our social democracy. It was founded by a workers' union and financed also. You know, that is really part of the whole story. So I think that is really really important also to maybe avoid the let's say the somewhat political issues. I understand there's also a sentiment against, you know, Western architecture in present day India and so on. I don't know if it's really correct. It's not my field at all. But I would look for, let's say, neutral arguments, like what it did to the people who used the building and so on. And yesterday I put the third argument in the chat, and that is circularity. You know, it was repeated this today. You know, it's no longer proper to pull down buildings and build new buildings. You know, we have CO2 emissions, we have embodied energy. You know, it's simply irresponsible to think like that. Our students would kill me if I would propose anything like that nowadays. I mean, we really have to look at these issues differently. What I could do, that is the point of view of Docomomo, I would say. As an architect here, I put forward some issues about repairing brickwork and so on. There is a lot of expertise in the Netherlands about brick, like gluing brick. I mentioned it before. And I saw a few Dutch products already mentioned in one of the lectures. So if there's anything we can do, that is also an option.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I think we'll be in touch with you for that. And there are many questions on community engagement. So I will put those all together. The first is how, of course, it says, what do the experts think? I'm always wary of that word. Anyway, what do the experts think about engaging with the larger community? And particularly, the question is about how the citizens of Ahmedabad. And that was one of the reasons we were very keen to get Kirti as well as Malika here. And there is Mr. Satsangi also here today, the one who was one of the main architects who was around when the campus was being built. But we do mean to engage with many more. So how do you engage the citizens of Ahmedabad in this? And how do you get them to recognize and reiterate the significance of IMA? Is it feasible? And of course, Meenakshi also has a similar question that how do we run an intense program of engagement? What are your suggestions in this context and so on and so forth. So, and of course, there is a third question about sensitizing the IMA management about the heritage value or values, I would say, of IMA. And I think all these questions fall within your ambit.
Sure.
So
I think I'll try. Yeah,
some of those, but
I'll try to address the three of them together with an overall response and thought. That is based in our experience. Everywhere where we go and foster community engagement and implement community engagement activities, we take the role in a way as the facilitator. We don't go, as Teresa was saying before, we don't go to any place and impose a specific agenda. We just facilitate those conversations that were not happening before, or that were happening, but some stakeholders or community leaders were missing as part of those conversations. And I think that is where it's critical in our experience in Ontario Place, in Buhara currently, at the Patel Stadium in Ahmedabad as well. We were able to facilitate a set of meetings and celebratory events that had different approaches, different let's say themes. Some that are more technical, that really engage kind of heritage professionals, architects, engineers, urban planners, preservationists, to really address some of those technical questions. But then other questions that have to do with the with potential adaptive reuse plans, with changes that the sites might be able to embrace, with not only architects and urban planners, but also with community members that benefit and use those spaces frequently. And obviously, something that is key is that from beginning to end, the owners and managers of these places, these sites, are part of the process. I think that is something that the Getty does very well through the Keeping It Modern program, to really make sure that when a CMP is going to be conducted, the site managers and owners are part of that process, along with the people, the team implementing the CMP. So in a way, what we do is to really facilitate those meetings. And I think, what it's really key, based again on our experience, is that whoever that facilitator is someone that is respected and that is trusted by everyone, because in some cases it's a very smooth process, but in other cases there are tensions in the process. So you need to make sure that it's someone, an entity, an individual, or a set of individuals that really are trusted by the community members, or that at least are able to build that trust in the process, which is also part of the process in itself. That would be my overall reflection on those questions.
Yes. And we've seen how the idea catches on once you start. We start with a small group and more people join in, because everyone has some stories to tell which are all quite credible, and I think we should go that. And since there's been a lot of talk, or some statements issued by the IMA about what they call reconstruction, and what we understand as reconstruction may be something very different. But there is a question from Priya Jain, and I don't know who wants to address this, maybe Teresa or Susan or whoever you want to, that what does reconstruction mean? What probably everyone feels that by reconstruction, the IMA wants to construct something which in their opinion looks like the old buildings. So maybe, this is my assumption is that the new buildings proposed by IMA will be inspired, that's in, kind of quotes, by the original campus, kind of like the new IMA campus by the architect, and not replicas. So when we talk about reconstruction, are these replicas or what are these? What exactly is? I mean, everyone wants to know whether or not, of course, it's not easy to say if reconstruction should be resorted to or not, without really going into the details. But what is reconstruction? Is it a replica? What is it meant? I mean, the people want to be educated about this. Who wants to take on this? Very difficult.
See 3 hands up.
Perhaps Susan can start, and then I can tell a few words.
Yeah.
I can join us.
I can have a go, but this is a huge topic. I mean, I think it really depends. I think there are.
You can always.
Yeah, I think there are. There are many. I think it really depends. There are different approaches for different circumstances, and it really depends on what is deemed to be significant about the place. Is it the scale? Is it the design? Is it the material realization? And there are different languages that can be employed in that. And I think that's a discourse that happens through really a deep understanding of place, significance, and what's appropriate in the cultural context. I do think what's as important as the language that's chosen is the quality of the response.
Yeah.
Because that is absolutely key. The quality of how you respond to that existing environment, context, and circumstances. So brevity, that's enough, I think.
Yeah, I know there are a whole lot of questions and I have many, but I think it's kind of time to stop.
Yeah, no, if I may, I'd like it to complete only, I'm completely agreeing with Susan. I'd like it also only to tell something that as we discussed yesterday and today, to take a decision, we need to understand the significance and we need to understand what we have. And for reconstruction is the same thing. So there is no answer, a unique answer. You need really to look what we have, what are the meanings, what are the problems, and to balance this. And only to finish, I only like to tell that ICOMOS is just finishing the preparation of a kind of a guidance for reconstruction matters. It was more thinking on problems related with the large scale destruction of natural catastrophes of war, but where some guidance and some important ideas and approaches are put on this guidance. So it will be ready in a few days, a few weeks. It's just, we are just in the finishing. Thank you.
We probably need many more webinars, that of course we know, but we have to close. So I'll ask Annabel to come in and give us whatever, her wrap-up comment.
I think Prem has his hand up, so if you'd like to
yes, Prem,
hear his comment.
Okay, I'll be brief. One is the issue of reconstruction. I think we need to document the intangible heritage, the stories that the current project holds. And if we reconstruct, it's necessary for us to demonstrate how what is reconstructed is receptive to those stories. It's important to make that link. Otherwise, the reconstruction just as a physical thing is empty.
Exactly.
And briefly on community engagement, we have to be careful not to cast this as just a problem of technical expertise. There's a wider question of collective memory And some of us have to play a bridging role where we have enough expertise to understand the technicalities involved. But in communicating to a wider constituency, we are careful not to use the language of our discipline and use the language of the community.
Yeah. Thank you. Annabel?
Yes.
I hand over to you.
Yes. Sanaeya, can you share my PPT? So thank you, everyone. All these have been very insightful thoughts and a lot for IIM to chew on. I'm just going to sum up the discussion with a few points and then present a few points that have been raised by our speakers as a way forward. Most of these points have been taken from the presentations made by the speakers in the panel discussion. I think the key takeaway from this session has been that in order to intervene in any site, we have to have a value-based approach. This has been said by almost everyone who has spoken in this session. We have to emphasize the notions of cultural significance, authenticity, integrity in relation to conservation, and then look at repurposing on adaptive use, specifically when we're looking at achieving sustainable management of the site. So I think this is a point that has run through everyone's presentation. Another important point is that built heritage has to be understood as representing value over time, not just a 100-year window, but what does it mean for time to come? And for this, a heritage audit is critical. We have to acknowledge heritage as a public asset. The most important aspect that has been discussed today is the preparation of a conservation management plan, the importance of having a conservation management plan that understands the significance of the campus, looks at all the attributes, the planning, the landscape, the buildings, both the tangible and the intangible attributes of the place. And therefore, I think if IIM has to look at one important takeaway from this session, it would be get that comprehensive conservation management plan in place and then use it as a basis for revisiting the master plan that has been prepared. Everyone wishes that this conservation management plan is looked at with transparency and the management looks at the whole process with a trust both on the side of all stakeholders, as well as I think the stakeholders have to also trust that the management is going to take the right decisions. Of course, one wishes that the management was part of this webinar, but we hope going forward we can get them involved. Another point brought up is that community dialogue is very, very essential. This has been raised not just in this session, but in the previous session. One very interesting comment was heritage value lies in collective memories of the users. Coming to the next point, coming to the next point, everyone is concerned about the state of conservation of the building material, the fabric, the structure, and I think we all agree that a lot of study is needed before recommendations can be made of what needs to be done to increase that structural capacity and conserve or preserve the structure as it is. And finally, the last point that was brought up, if in the eventuality that we cannot conserve these buildings and one has to go in for rebuilding, restructuring or reconstruction, then undertake a comprehensive documentation program looking not just at architectural documentation, but all the building elements, the original design, the materials used, the craftsmanship, all the tangible and intangible aspects of the place, including the stories associated with it. Now, next slide. I will just sum up the way forward for our audience today. yes, ICOMOS will look at releasing this, the proceeds of this webinar as a publication. In fact, that is what our institutional partner KRVIA is going to take on as their responsibility. After we finish with the webinar, they are going to bring out a publication, hopefully as a hard and a soft copy. The YouTube videos of all the presentations will be released after we have taken due permission from all the presenters. And we look forward to having some kind of an institutional structure to take this initiative forward. We have asked for email IDs from those interested in being part of this initiative. I have also shared the email ID of NSC 20C. Those of you interested in being part of this dialogue going forward, please do write to us. This is also a request going out to all the organizations who have been part of this webinar, whether it is Intact, whether it is ISC20C, Docomomo, Getty, to be supportive of this initiative, and we can discuss how to formalize this into a structure that can take this dialogue forward, of course, with IIM management. Going forward, we should, and we hope to, convene a meeting of international and Indian experts. We would also like to have another dialogue going with all the stakeholders, whether it is the management, the alumni, conservation professionals, going down to the contractors who have been involved in the construction of this, as well as research scholars who have studied the building in great detail. This is something that would, again, need the support of an organization to back this activity. What we've realized is nothing can be achieved without having everyone on a common platform. And finally, a point that was brought to the table by Susan, that this is a lesson to look at other modern heritage places, not just in Ahmedabad, but in the rest of the country, and urge for protection, legal protection for these structures, because we know what has happened in the case of the Hall of Nations, where there was no legal protection, and we lost a very important icon of the 20th century. And with that, I'd like to end and hand over to Sanaeya, who will give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Annabel. On behalf of ICOMOS India NSC 20C, ICOMOS India EPWG, ICOMOS India West Zone, and our institutional partner USM's Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute for Architectural and Environmental Studies, I would like to thank all the speakers, the chairs, for their valuable insights. I would like to thank all the attendees for making time out of their busy schedules and attending this webinar. I would like to thank Kiran Joshi for planning the event, and our organizing and webinar management team, Annabel Lopez, NSC 20C coordinator, Ritika Jharia, NSC 20C co-coordinator, and my team of Apurva Iyengar, Khushi Shah, Nigar Sheikh, Shivani Kate, and Prashita. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a pleasant day.